all these things going underneath, but everything needs to be help support the overall physical structure. So the strength is not applying. All the weight gets transferred to all your beats, and that's where you get your strength. It is if you build up, obviously it's going to be more, framed here. Like an inner panel here that connects to it on the side. On the side of it, you're going to have these big neck gauges. I'll be using like 2 by 6s between the outside all the way around. And so it's from this creation is what makes it strong.
We don't go to the wow. True. I live down the street. It's all there is. That's it. I got your toes back. It's like he's ready to. $1 million. Look at you.
That's the other thing. It's like some people MDF.
We're waiting on citizens to sign in and then we'll start.
Is this new stuff or is this?
This is all new. Stop blocks away. This is just citizen comment I received even up to today.
Oh, okay.
And this is sort of what you can do.
I took Jack out on his first
Was asked at the meeting.
That was the instead of there, and then we went back home somewhere.
Want to look into the feasibility of that? Somebody knows a neighbor. You're buying?
Maine.
Oh, is
Maine went down.
Is it the house Trader Joe's? Oh, my prayers have been heard.
How did he know?
Right behind there.
Wow.
Right.
Thank you. I was just telling him I needed
I already had a lot.
Short it down.
I'll ask them to get too.
Thank you.
Hey, fancy legs, fancy pants.
8 foot something. Cut it into 2 feet sections. So you can take one.
No.
Oh, it's small. It's one of those little rectangles.
Good evening. This is the Evanston Plan Commission. The commission was established by ordinance passed by the city pursuant to statutory and home rule authority. One of the duties of the commission is to conduct hearings on planned unit developments. I'm going to pause for a few minutes because I see we have some people who are signing in, and then I will go through the purpose of the meeting tonight and our procedures. While we are waiting for people to sign in, I should note that we have a quorum, and I will ask for any motions with respect to the minutes of May 9th.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on the minutes. We had a 2-3 vote on the rezoning of the R2 single family to a B1A. I just would like, there was no mention except for the vote of the dissent, and I would like that in the notes because I know that the older people do read these, and I felt very strongly about that, and I think the other dissenter felt very strongly as well, so I would like to see the notes to reflect that. Besides that, I am fine with the notes.
Can you clarify the change you want?
I don't believe that the change met the standards.
And Do you want the vote noted?
The vote is noted, but I just think there was issues around taking a piece of property out of residential into business, and I think it sets a precedent, and that's why I voted against it. And I just want mention of that.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes, and can someone with amendment, and can someone state the amendment, if there is such a motion?
Yeah, I don't know what the amendment would be. I just want,
I would move approval of the minutes with Seth's amendment, but I'm not going to try to state the amendment because it was his objection.
yeah, it was two of us. I don't think it met the standards necessary for the map amendment. So the objection is that the two vote for the dissent was that we didn't feel it met the standards,
Okay.
and I'd like to have that added.
Is there a second?
Thank you.
To the motion to approve with change?
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Well, for the record, this is Lenny Asaro. I'm abstaining from this vote, as I have on all matters regarding this particular application, because my law firm represented the applicant. So,
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 I also abstain in that I wasn't here.
Thank you.
That brings us to the plan unit development at 1211 Chicago Avenue. I was starting to go through our procedures. The Plan Commission does not make a decision with respect to this issue, but it does make a recommendation to the City Council, and the Commission must make findings of fact with respect to the applicable standards. In Illinois, because plan unit development is a type of special use, we will be making findings with respect to both the plan development standards and the special use standards. Part of our procedure requires people who make comments on this to address their comments to the standards. And so if you speak on this matter, the standards will be relevant. Standards run a number of pages, so I won't go through them in detail, though I may ask speakers how their comment relates to the standards. What we'll begin with is having staff read into the record a list of things that have been placed on file in this matter. And then the staff will provide a short report summarizing the proposal. For the next portion of the hearing, we'll hear testimony or evidence from the applicants or their attorneys and witnesses, and that'll be limited to 20 minutes. Then we'll hear testimony from persons in support of the application, and that's limited to 5 minutes a person. When all of the persons supporting the applicants have completed their statement, then we allow cross-examination by anyone who has questions of those who supported the application. We then hear evidence and testimony from people who oppose the application, and normally time is limited to 5 minutes per person, and that's done to try and avoid redundant testimony. But sometimes a group of citizens will have chosen someone to speak for them, and they can ask for more time, and we have discretion to allow that. As you give evidence, please explain how the evidence applies to the applicable standards. When those opposed have finished, then they may be cross-examined, and after that, the applicant may rebut evidence of persons who are opposed to the proposal. Then there can be cross-examination of that testimony. Any testimony or evidence which is cumulative, repetitious, harassing, or irrelevant to the case is not permitted. Following all the evidence, the staff can give a report. That staff report, whoever gives it, can be cross-examined. And then at the end, there is a summary closing by petitioner limited to 10 minutes and a closing by interested persons limited to 5 minutes per person, and a rebuttal by the petitioner limited to 3 minutes. You need to be recognized by the chair before you speak. It's most efficient to address your questions to the chair, and then the witness will answer. At the conclusion of the evidentiary portion of the case and the closing arguments, we will close testimony, and the Plan Commission will discuss the case and discuss the standards, and at that point, no further comment from the public will be taken. So with that, let me ask that you read into the record what's been filed in this matter.
Good evening. Craig Sklenar, General Planner for the City of Evanston. Tonight we have plan development, which is item 12 PLND 0051 at 1211 Chicago Avenue. Scott Gindel, representative of Gindel W&B LLC, developer of the proposed project, applies for a planned development to construct a 13,000 square foot grocery store to be operated by Trader Joe's on a parcel of land totaling 48,400 square feet in size. 6-10-1-9 parens D1 of the Municipal Code requires all proposed developments with a zoning lot over 30,000 square feet to apply for a planned development. The Plan Commission is a recommending body to the City Council. City Council is a determining body in this case. Submitted to you for their application for planned development included a zoning analysis, pre-application conference materials from the Site Plan Appearance Review Committee on June 27th, public benefit statement, a development plan, landscape plan, plat of survey, preliminary plat of subdivision or consolidation, plan development application form, certificate of disclosure of ownership interest form, open space maintenance provision statement, restrictive covenants, schedule of development, economic feasibility statement, traffic circulation impact study, plan compliance, neighborhood compatibility, special use application, request for development allowances, general conditions for plan development in commercial districts, and standards for plan development in commercial districts as a response. Also included in your packet is staff report, which summarizes the plan development itself and the staff recommendation for a favorable recommendation from the Plan Commission to the City Council for this application. Tonight, the two development allowances they are requesting is a side yard setback on the north side of 3 feet 9 inches and a side yard setback development allowance of 1 foot on the south side of the property. I'm going to turn it over to Scott Gindel of Gindel WMB, who will introduce his team and provide a 20-minute presentation.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Scott Gindel. I'm the president of Terrico, Inc., based in Wilmette, Illinois. Together with me tonight is Kevin Gaisley, Senior Vice President of Terrico, as well as our principal architect, Mike Brecklaw of OKW Partners. Terrico, just for informative purposes, was founded by myself and my wife in 1986. We've been involved in over 75 developments in and around the Chicago metropolitan area, and have also developed in 9 states throughout the United States. Some of the projects that you may be familiar with in this surrounding area, we were the principal developers of the retrofit of Lincoln Village in 2001, 2002. We also were the developers of the project on Skokie Boulevard just south of Old Orchard, where the M&R Theaters was at Emerson and Skokie Boulevard. Additionally, when I was first cutting my teeth in the development business and had no gray hair, we were the fee developers for the Grievous family on the Tommy Nevins project in downtown Evanston. And of recent vintage, we won the President's Award for Architecture when we redeveloped the Skokie train station at Dempster and the Skokie Swift. That station, by the way, had to be moved 200 feet. It was an 800,000-pound building. We hoisted it up on 5.5-foot hydraulics, put wheels on it, pushed it with bulldozers, put it on new foundations, and it's a nice project for us. With regards to this site, this is something that we've been eyeballing for quite some time. Trader Joe's has been in and around Evanston looking for an appropriate site for some time now. We have a relationship with them, specifically Kevin Gaisley in my office, and they asked us for help in this community in Evanston. Johanna was instrumental in that as well. She placed a call to Trader Joe's as well, and we began negotiating on the Blockbuster property some 18 months ago. We closed on this property in the summer of 2011. We've been negotiating a lease with Trader Joe's for approximately 8 to 9 months, and 2 months ago we got that lease signed, and obviously subject to the recommendation of this body and the approval of the City Council. Again, this was something that we looked at 6 ways to Sunday, how we could potentially even retrofit the old Blockbuster building, the old Saxon Paint building, the old A&P grocery store building, whatever iteration it was in over the last 50 years. Ultimately, we found that it didn't work. That needed to be torn down, and we worked with the city to create a site plan and parking configuration that worked for the tenant. We've also made numerous changes to this plan over the last 15 months. Some of those were actually the direct result of our working with residents and listening to some of their concerns. At this time, what I want to do is ask Mike Brecklaw to come up and take you through the plan itself, and then obviously we're available for questions, and any further issues that come up we'll respond to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Let me ask anyone who's going to testify to raise their right hand. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this commission?
I do. Thank you. Again, I'm Mike Brecklaw with OKW Architects. Glad to be working on this project. I'm an Evanston resident, so I know the area quite well. Have enjoyed working on a few projects in Evanston. The Central Street apartments are breaking ground right now, so looking forward to this breaking ground as well. I'll try to keep this brief and work within the 20 minutes. Most of this is supported in the documents that you have in front of us, but I'll go through the slides real quick. 13,000 square foot single-story building, little over an acre of a site. As the package you have in front of you, it's 78 parking spaces. Based on some recent revisions, we now have 81 parking spaces. We've gone through a number of public presentations and community meetings, beginning with a community meeting at the Montessori School at the end of May. We've presented to Design Evanston to go over the appearance of the building, and that was very well received. And we've presented to the Spark Committee as well, just prior to the holiday. I've also had a meeting with the merchants, and most recently in the past 48 hours have had several discussions and meetings with the local residents to resolve some issues with some of the loading concerns that we'll go through quickly. Again, these are the same information in your books. I won't belabor it, but as far as a public benefit, certainly on a financial and economic benefit to the city, it removes blighted properties and provides a great deal of economic benefit to the area. On a specific level with the building, we will meet the Evanston Sustainable Building Ordinance for the project as we continue construction design. We've tried hard to get as much extra space to the sidewalk as possible. Our experience, Chicago Avenue is pretty narrow sidewalk, so the western face of the building is pulled back 3 feet from the property line to enable us to give a little bit more breathing room to the sidewalk along there. We're also working with the planning department to implement the Chicago Avenue streetscape standards in terms of pavers, tree placement, and so forth. Just some brief comments on the planning. We've made efforts in all of the planning to keep the loading facilities and all vehicular circulation keyed in as much as possible towards Chicago Avenue. All the loading access is towards the back, and I'll go over that further in the plan. As Craig had mentioned, the development allowances we're looking for, and you'll see that in the plan, are on the north and south setbacks. So to go over the plan real quick, and this is just a basic black and white plan. The building is located where the parking lot for Blockbusters is right now. It's fairly tight against the south property line against Warren Shell, a 1-foot setback. The primary entrance for all of the customers is at the corner of the building here, and then the field of parking, which was 78 spaces, is now 81 spaces. 2 entrances, full access off of Chicago Avenue. I'll use this to explain a change that we just incorporated in the past 24 hours. We had originally had some alley access to allow the truck to back up into the loading dock, which meant that there was a large break in the fence to allow the truck to come in and back up. But what we've resolved with a civil engineering and sort of looked tighter at the truck movement is that we have a continuous fence along the east side of the property, as well as a fence along here that will sort of prevent any vehicular access to the alley. And the loading that will happen about 3 times a day for Trader Joe's from a 67-foot semi will come into the parking lot. The parking spaces against this portion of the alley are managed in a way by Trader Joe's so that those are coned off at the times when there are deliveries so that the maneuvering of the truck can happen here and back up against this area. Let me just jump to the landscape plan. Illustrates the same thing, but I could talk a little bit more about this. One of the other key issues with the plan is the shared parking area. Because it's property that's assembled between both Terrico and the city is using its asset to develop some shared parking spaces. This illustrates it in the light blue against the north face, as well as some parking spaces against the alley fence. These spaces here are going to be redistributed somewhere else in further discussion because I feel that that's going to conflict with the maneuvering of the truck. So those will either happen towards the front of the site or distributed in the spaces along here. Should say a couple other things on the landscape. Again, we're following the landscape ordinance in terms of paving and tree placement. We'll look in this at more detail with the forestry department and so forth in terms of exact placement of trees. We're incorporating some of the brick paving back into the sort of the public area at the front of the store where you would enter the store. The cart storage and bike area as well we'd handle. And then there are trees incorporated into the lot. Some of the trees have been sort of in this area been taken out to allow for truck movement because we felt that they need to be able to move over that. Loading area, again, the semi will back up here. There is a 8-foot fence. We'd like to go for an 8-foot fence along the alley to sort of increase that visual screening and any noise reduction that could create for the residents. There'll be a 6-foot wooden fence that comes from the alley to this corner of the existing residence building. The building itself, we feel, acts as a fence on that side. So again, the loading, a truck will back up here. There's a screened area of sort of pallet storage when they take and pick up each day. And then the trash area is fully enclosed. It's not heated, but it's got a doors to it and a masonry enclosure around it that is currently showing the doors facing out so that the Trader Joe's would bring their trash through their dock area, drop them off. The doors would always be locked on those times when the the refuse would be picked up from the alley side. From a landscape point of view, I also wanted to point out what we're illustrating is about an 18-inch setback, or in that 3-foot setback, we're incorporating some foundation planting against the face of the building. And you'll see that we're also developing this area. With one of the comments that came up in the Design Evanston discussion was a desire to make the building and the streetscape merge, and so that the building felt like it was helping to shape the entire street. So along this part of the site, in that landscape area, we've incorporated a trellis and a setback. A little blow-up detail of that shows that portion of the site. So sidewalk, trees, the brick paving per the streetscape guidelines, and then a trellis, sort of metal and wood design that would help both screen the parking lot and create a sort of a little bit more enjoyable spot along that street. And then at the center point of this trellis would be an opportunity for a bench. But we'd see this as an opportunity for both vines to grow up from the ground, but also a great opportunity for hanging baskets with seasonal and sort of, you could see the purple color with northwestern color flowers in there. So that's part of the landscape side. Quick overview of some of the building design and renderings. We're looking at the building as a fairly sort of contemporary sort of massing of different materials. So it's the key entrance is here. There's a panel product, wood-like panel product above the entry that forms the sign band. There's clear story windows into the grocery store. Main entrance, windows along Chicago Avenue. The stone material, we're looking to use a slate to sort of form the base of the building along Chicago Avenue, along the parking lot. Brick masonry along all the other sides. And the canopy that we're using on the front of the building will mimic the character of the trellis. So even at the front of the building here, there will be some opportunity for some planting that could sort of climb up the trellis on the front of the building and sort of continue that. View from the looking north across the canopy of Warren Shell, really fundamentally a property wall condition. Only the front, about 60 feet, maybe 50 feet of the building is truly visible. The rest is concealed by Warrens. The corner piece sort of acts as a marker towards traffic coming from the south. The overall elevations, the parking lot side, again, a continuous canopy that both covers the entrance for the customer, where the carts would be staged, and bike racks in this area, incorporating some clear story lighting into the building beyond, screening at the truck dock, both a roofed over area and a screen wall of masonry construction at least 8 feet tall on that side. The Chicago Avenue front, again, glazing looking into the grocery store, the alley side, all masonry, and the side against Warren. I should say the height of the building is set with a parapet height, so it's screening all the mechanical equipment above that. Some variation in height to just improve the massing. And I think that's fundamentally that's a quick walkthrough of the project. Scott or Kevin, anything critical to add? Hopefully that was 20 minutes.
Does the commission have any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Seth.
Is anyone else? Thanks for the presentation. In terms of the delivery, did you say 3 times a week or 3 times a day?
No, you've got Trader Joe's trucks that are 3 times a day, and then...
I thought I heard.
Yeah, and then you have panel trucks as well.
So 3 semis a day?
3 semis a day, that's correct.
Coming into that lot off of Chicago Avenue?
Correct.
What time of days do the trucks generally show up?
Before opening and right after closing.
So before opening is?
6 to 8. And after closing, 9 to 10:30 is probably where you're going to see the deliveries.
Of the now 81 spaces, how many are handicapped? Because in the document we got, there was one shy of the requirements, I believe. I think there were 3, and
There are 4 on site.
There are 4 now?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, I apologize. There is actually 4 in the proposed site plan that you were provided. The 4th one is on the north side of the property with the shared Evanston parking component. So there are 3 on the south side nearest to the front door, and then the 4th is on the north.
Okay, then I must have miscounted.
There's 1 here, and then there's 2 there and 1 immediately in front of the store.
And 1 on Chicago Avenue, right in front of the store.
And 1 on Chicago Avenue as well, that's part of it.
Which is probably the closest, or the second closest one to the front door. So there are really 5, only 4 count, though.
And then another question on the parking spaces. For public use, those are public use at all time, is that correct?
No, after hours.
So it's only after hours?
Correct.
So I guess for, not for you, but for the city then, for the investment that we're putting into a parking lot, Evanston residents can only use it for non-shopping after, what time does the...
9 o'clock.
After 9 o'clock. So it's only after 9 that residents will be able to use those spaces, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Another question I had for you is that you list on an early slide incremental tax that was 400 and something to 600 and something thousand a year. I believe that's incremental. Is that correct to the city? Is that what you're saying?
Incremental.
So how is that incremental tax calculated? It seems to me that we're having now a 3rd grocery store in the area, and just was wondering where that calculation came from.
Typically, Trader Joe's does not eat into other grocery sales. They actually have the tendency over time to increase sales at nearby grocery stores. For instance, at Garden Fresh in Northbrook, which is within 300, 400 feet of Trader Joe's, Garden Fresh had been there prior to Trader Joe's arrival. The owners of the Garden Fresh chain are friends of mine, and I said, what happened after Trader Joe's moved in? He said, up, up, up. And typically, when you have a Trader Joe's shopper, they're not doing their primary grocery shopping at Trader Joe's. They're going to Jewel, they're going to Whole Foods, and they're going to Trader Joe's. So ultimately, from an evidentiary standpoint, we've seen actually increases in sales in grocery stores in the area.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
I see questions somewhere down there.
Oh, I have a couple of questions. Did you choose? Okay.
In order to get the extra spaces, the 81 spaces, how did you do that? I mean, it looked to me from the plan that you had submitted that things were pretty packed in.
In the layout, we had the package that you have that was submitted. There was truck movement the truck would come in, pull into the alley, and back up. So the spaces right along here were sort of parallel spaces, and there was a lot of striped off area, I think you see on the plan. So in this layout, where all of those spaces will be controlled by Trader Joe's and sort of coned off at those times of the day when no one can park there. So they're managing the parking in those spots to enable the truck to back up. In the previous scheme, all of those spaces weren't in the way of truck movement.
We replaced, I think, 2 or 3 parallel spaces with 6 perpendicular spaces.
Right, exactly.
I see.
So
Okay.
it's up in that area.
And then I also noticed then that in order to provide for the truck movement, it looks like 2 trees were deleted from the plan that we received. Isn't there some way that you could replant the trees somewhere else so we don't lose 2 trees from the parking lot?
One of the things that we were willing to put into our approvals is typically when you see a plan like this, I believe your ordinance is 2.5 to 3 inch trees. We're willing to stipulate that the calipers of trees would be 4 to 5 inches on all trees to start. You'll have a much fuller canopy, and you won't have the competition for light and air that you would have with multiple trees. We could figure out a way to add a couple more trees if that was important to this commission. And I would say to you this, that one of the things that we addressed when we did the trellis was how do we create landscaping in a front along Chicago Avenue that reads like a continuous green belt. And I thought that was fairly creative. The Design Evanston people were really instrumental in urging us to think out of the box a little bit. And between Mike and myself and the Design Evanston people, we came up with the idea for 2 trellises, one on the building and one in that expanse between the ingress and the egress. And I think you create a nice banding of color, year-round color there with the vines. And in, obviously, spring and fall, you have floral colors as well.
Now, would the landlord be responsible for maintaining the landscaping,
Yes.
or is that the tenant's
Yes,
obligation?
no, it's landlord responsibility, and we're based in Wilmette. I have my own landscaping and maintenance companies that I use throughout metropolitan Chicago. As I told the neighbors, they can all have my cell phone numbers. If anything is a problem at the site, they know where to find me. I live within 10 minutes of the site, and my office is within 8 minutes of the site. So we'll get there. Actually, I live within 15 minutes of the site. I don't want to embellish.
And a final question. How will the public use be designated? I mean, how will people know
We'll sign it.
that they can park there?
We'll sign it.
And it will be very
clear.
Very clear?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because there are some other places in Evanston where it's not so clear. It took me a while to realize that
Yeah.
I could park.
This was a back and forth issue between the city of Evanston, Trader Joe's. Sometimes we felt like as developers and architects, we were kind of caught in the middle. But we tried to serve 2 masters, and I think we ended up with a good plan.
Mhm. Is this, perhaps this is a question for city staff, will these parking places be metered? Or will there be a charge for them, or are they open to the public for evening and, I guess, overnight use?
Good evening, Johanna Neiden, Economic Development Planner. I've been working with these gentlemen since the beginning of this project. We have 2 parking license agreements for those properties, and in those license agreements, we didn't stipulate how we would manage the parking. We're working right now with our parking manager, who oversees all of our parking garages and the meters throughout the city, to determine how we would regulate those parking spaces, because we want to make sure that they're a benefit to the residents and to visitors to the city who might be visiting stores. Within the license agreement, within the first year, we're going to evaluate the usage of those parking spaces, as well as Trader Joe's usage for their shoppers. So right now, people can start parking there at 9 o'clock. We would look at going earlier as Trader Joe's works through their first year of operations. We've learned grocery stores have a cycle of operation that starts with Thanksgiving and goes through the December holidays, through Easter, and then the summer holidays as well. They need a year of settling out to figure out how their store acts and how the market works in those places. So after that year, we're going to reevaluate if we've used the parking spaces to the best of our need and their need as well.
And by the way, all construction, all maintenance, any leaseholds that needed to be bought out, property issues, we're doing all that in addition to what the city is doing there. So it is a shared responsibility and shared effort and shared capital enterprise as well.
Stuart?
I'm assuming there's a good reason for having perpendicular parking spaces as opposed to diagonal parking spaces.
We tested a number of layouts, variety of positions of the cars, whether the aisles run east-west, north-south. This was the kind of maximum. Diagonal parking spaces often decrease the real quantity of spaces you can get on a site. They might, in some conditions, they allow you to, get parking in place, but this did not meet the Trader Joe's requirements for the number of spaces.
How many spaces would you lose if it were diagonal as opposed to perpendicular?
I'm not
The
sure.
reason I mention this is because two of your close-by competitors, Jewel, it's all diagonal. Whole Foods is all diagonal. And as someone who goes to those stores frequently, it's a lot easier to park in a diagonal space as opposed to having to square up your car and then pull in.
Sure. No, understood. I think we would, I don't have the exact number off the top of my head because we've gone through a number of iterations, but I would guess we would lose 4 to 5 spaces from this layout.
Is that a change perhaps that Trader Joe's might consider?
We are, at 78, we were at their minimum threshold. I mean, we have probably 3 spaces of real flexibility there.
Is that to say you would not consider diagonal parking?
It was considered, and Trader Joe's was adamant relative to the minimum number of parking spaces.
I was at a Trader Joe's today out on, I guess it was Waukegan, and it's tough. It is tough getting into those perpendicular parking spots, and I think it presents a hazard that one doesn't see too often when you have a slanted parking.
Typically we've done 30 Walgreens as a developer, and it's the same size building, 13 to 15,000 square feet. They're typically smaller sites. It's not, you can't get those full rows that you need for diagonal parking in many situations. I would say virtually every Walgreens that we've done has been perpendicular parking, and that's relatively quick in and out traffic, and it's worked exceedingly well for them in the course of our history with them, and they are adamant when possible that they like perpendicular versus diagonal parking.
Okay, thanks. One other question about fencing. What kind of material will you be using on the alley fence?
Anticipating that both fences would be a wood fence, not the particular design, but they'd be robust, shadow box kind of character.
Board cedar. One of the things it tends to hold up well. It looks attractive. Some of the neighbors have talked in terms of a cinder block fence as better sound attenuation. It's not that I'm not open to that possibility. I would prefer the board on board.
Thank you.
And you have some?
Yeah, I have one concern, which is the sound issue and the fencing. Mm-hmm. Because from 6 to 8 a.m., having semis backing up into the loading dock. Yeah. Semis are typically very loud with a diesel engine that keeps running while they're unloading, and then the brakes are, if you've ever listened to them back up, it's quite loud. So I'm worried about that fencing. On my question is, so that's as a concern just out there. My question is, as a cyclist, I would avoid Chicago Avenue at all costs and try to come through the alley.
Yeah, that was one thing that Mike missed.
Yeah,
and was the only thing.
A little entrance for pedestrians.
There is a 4-foot opening for bikes and pedestrians.
Oh, that's good. That was a question, because you tend to avoid Chicago Avenue because the traffic there is a bit crazy after Dempster and before the grocery stores. The other concern that I would have is that are those two-way entry and exit?
Yes, they are. The entrances are there. They're two-way. You can exit or leave in any direction.
That can be very hostile to pedestrians, and I would be very careful with the trellises so that they don't hide pedestrians from view.
Exactly. They're set back.
We've got about 10 feet on each side?
More than that. It's about 50 feet of length.
And it's 85 feet total?
Yeah, so you can see the setback from the edge of the trellis. This is a larger scale than this site plan, but
I think in one of the renderings there was like a little thing, a little bump up with the Trader Joe's logo.
Yes, this
And some-
appeared, this appeared
yeah.
further along.
If someone
This
is sitting
rendering
in a
wasn't-
car, they might not see a pedestrian coming.
This is incorrect to the elevation. We didn't update the perspective. But it's a very good point, and we were careful about that.
That's it.
I think everybody on my left has questions. Let's maybe start at the far end, or Lenny.
Okay, well, a while ago you said there have been many. Sorry. A while ago you mentioned that there have been many meetings where you've actually listened to what the neighbors had to say. And you said there were issues that, there were suggestions that you took and some that apparently didn't take. And I think the fence is an issue. I think you're now proposing an 8-foot high wooden fence.
Yes.
Okay, and then the issue of also landscape in terms of privacy, which Commissioner Ledesma has raised the issue of noise. Looking at this rendering here, is just a straight fence down the alley. Is there landscape, and you can actually plant some trees over there instead of asking for bigger caliber of trees on Chicago Avenue, right?
The problem with the landscaping along that fence line, on the inside of that fence line, is that's when we took the alley out of play in terms of deliveries, you had to be able to make that swing with a delivery truck there, and it would have put those trees, or any trees, there in harm's way, and they wouldn't survive.
Actually, for the fence along here, we've, to a certain point where the truck movement avoids it, there's some landscaping against the fence, but along here, we actually have a guardrail in front of the fence, so that the fence is protected from any vehicle movement from delivery vehicles.
Okay. And also the trellis, is it a permanent fixture? Is it a permanent part of the building, or this is something that may come down at a future date?
It's very permanent. It will have footings, foundations. It will be a combination of metal and wood, so it will be a robust structure. And against the building, likewise, again, along Chicago Avenue. It's part of the canopy, and it's attached to the stone of the building, so it will be permanent.
Okay. And then, my last question is that street appears to be congested, especially Fridays and also over the weekend. And in light of the fact that there are other parts of Evanston that can actually use this sort of store, why this particular place? Because competitively, it doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, well, actually, what they thought was competitively, it made perfect sense to them. They wanted to be, and what you see with Trader Joe's is they like to locate as close to Whole Foods and other large grocery stores as possible. So that this was the very reason that they wanted to be here, and also the demographic in the area was such that these were Trader Joe's customers.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. First of all, I want to commend you for undertaking this particular project. I live further south on Chicago Avenue. I think I share the concern with Commissioner Steele regarding the traffic. It's six of one, half dozen of another. I've been disappointed to see that particular site has, kind of sat vacant and not used for some period of time. And I am in support of, development along Chicago Avenue. I do have some questions and I do have concerns. That being said, you understand that we're just a recommending body, so we don't make the final decision, and I'm assuming that the property owners and neighbors who are here understand that as well. But I do have some questions with regards to the project and with regards to, as it relates to the standards that we are bound to follow and to determine whether evidence has been presented on those points. So let me just start with just a couple of questions. I noticed that the parking stall sizes, according to the OKW architect's drawing that's in our binder, the stalls are 8 feet 6 inches in width. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Is that the minimum width under the Evanston zoning code? It is?
Yes.
Okay. The reason why I asked that, because I'm almost certain, because I walked it and measured it, not as it relates to this particular project, but for other matters. I'm pretty sure that the stall sizes at Jewel are approximately 10 feet. And I'm pretty sure that the stall size at Whole Foods is around 9.5, 9. I am concerned about the size of the size of the width. That concern is heightened even more because of the perpendicular nature of the parking. The difference between a Walgreens, which, by the way, on Chicago Avenue is got angled parking. I don't know the exact degree. The difference between the Walgreens and a Trader Joe's and a Whole Foods and a Jewel is one obvious factor. You've got carts, which means carts are going to be either sometimes left, unfortunately, within a parking stall. When people are going to take out their groceries, they need to have some space potentially between their cars if they're putting it in the car. Some people don't always put it in the trunk. I think 8 feet by 8 feet 6 inches is going to be a real challenge. But you're stuck with the land that you have, unfortunately. That's, I think, a big difference between the Walgreens and your site. But which leads me actually to the next point, which has to do with traffic circulation. I did not notice any traffic circulation patterns or drawings showing delivery trucks coming in and exiting, and just giving a general idea of the size of the range of the size of the trucks that you're going to be having make deliveries, and how they work with the vehicles, the customer vehicles coming in and off site.
Correct. Manhart Civil Engineering is our civil engineer, and they've done truck movement diagrams for a number of our layouts. The semis that deliver 3 times a day are defined as a 67-foot truck. So it's a large truck, part of their distribution network that delivers to all their stores. But they would enter off of Chicago Avenue and come down the aisle closest to the store. That's where we're sort of shortened the island here, so these areas are just striped off. The truck would turn into here and pull back, and then when it's leaving, it is able to make the turn this way. And again, that tree island has been shortened. It's just striped off, so the truck can go by that. It does not intersect the parking stalls in either of those locations. There are other bread vehicles or wine delivery that are smaller trucks.
So 67 is the largest?
67 is the largest truck, and we've looked at that numerous times. It's been the primary driver of the design of this site, is figuring out how deliveries take place and how they can move on the site and meet the parking requirements of Trader Joe's and et cetera, and be safe and sort of good practice for.
Thank you. I would just say that for your purposes, for the record, I would submit, I know you've submitted, you've had to have developed traffic circulation plans. I would request that you at least just make it part of the record of these proceedings so that it is available, for us, but also for the public as well.
One other thing as well. Kevin, what's the average purchase at a Trader Joe's store? $42. Okay, so and that goes to a couple points. They at $42, and I'm sure many people in this room are Trader Joe shoppers. I don't bring a shopping cart when I'm paying $42 worth of food. I've got a bag. It's rare that somebody is bringing a shopping cart out into a parking lot at a Trader Joe's. At $42 average purchase price, that's probably a bag and a half.
I completely, and I understand that. And like you, that's how I shop, but the problem is you have cart corrals in the parking lot.
Yeah, and
they have to be there.
Yeah,
I respect it. I understand you're limited in space. I'm not trying to,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just pointing something out that I think is going to be relevant to the standards that we're bound by. And like I said, you're limited because of the size of your site. I know if you could get a larger site, you'd prefer a little bit larger site. I understand that. I have clients who are in your position, so I respect that. In the binder that we were provided, the KLOA traffic study is marked draft.
Louis Abuna, principal with KLOA, is here tonight. So if you have questions of him, I'd ask him to come forward now.
Well, I guess my question is, to the extent that this is a draft that we've been provided, has there been a final study completed?
Yes, yes, it has been.
Okay, and then I assume that you're going to update that study. Will you need to update that study based on the revisions that were made within the last 24 hours with regard to the fence?
No, because we did not assume any of our traffic to use the alley to start with.
Okay.
So there was no access to the alley before, and that has not changed. The only change has been is the maneuverability of the trucks.
Okay. And so the study that was provided in our binder, which is marked draft, is dated March 28, 2012.
Yes.
Okay. When did you submit the final study? I guess is my question, and why don't we have it?
What's that? When was it submitted? Very recent. Recently. I mean, I forwarded it to Terraco, so they must have submitted it very recently, prior, obviously, after the packets were forwarded to you.
So that would be something I would just ask that would be submitted as part of the record of our proceedings here, the final study. And is it fair to say that the draft study and the final study are essentially the same as what's the draft study would be provided?
The findings and conclusions are the same, yes.
Okay. So just so that I'm clear, the plan that is part of the binder, the architectural site plan, the only thing that's been changed based on the PowerPoint presentation is that there will be a fence along that alley, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
As well as the layout of the parking stalls against that fence, the tree islands at this parking bay immediately adjacent to that. We're also showing a pedestrian pathway through an opening in the fence at that northeast corner.
Okay.
For bikers.
And has the trellis, either of the two trellises changed?
Trellis was illustrated on the package, I believe.
Okay. And then within the PowerPoint presentation and within the binder that was provided to us, I was looking for some evidence that would touch on the element under 6-3-5-10. I know you haven't committed to memory, but under standards for special uses, subsection D, and it says that the special use does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Typically, what I'm looking for, don't necessarily have to have, is some sort of testimony or evidence with regards to value, impact, potential impact, or no impact on adjacent properties. And so I'm just asking, where might we look for that?
You know what? If you want to bring in us to bring in testimony, we can bring in testimony to that effect. I could also cite the cartoon in the New York Times Magazine when the realtor is showing people around the neighborhood, and she's telling them about how great the schools are, and she goes, I know, we heard, but where's the Trader Joe's? So I'm not trying to be flippant, but we'll provide testimony.
Nor am I, and I appreciate that, and we've got a Whole Foods, we've got a Jewel. I'm not trying to make your life difficult. I'm not trying to basically have you spend more money than you need to. I know you've probably spent a lot already, but we're kind of on the spot because we've got to make findings, and we want to basically make findings. We want to, facilitate your application. And again, I like the fact that the site's going to be developed. I think that there's some challenges, that you're going to face. But overall, I appreciate your effort, and I appreciate you answering my questions.
Yeah, and we'll provide you with testimony if that's what this commission needs.
Okay. And I just want to say, I'm not asking for it for my own personal edification. I'm just going by what the standards have been provided to us by the zoning code. That's all. So.
It's okay? Okay. We're trying to be a very bicycle-friendly city. Can you talk a little bit about your plan for bikes getting in and out and the number of spaces that or racks that you're providing?
Well, the bike racks are located at the front of the store. In this area would be the sort of cart storage where you pick up the cart on the way in. But we're showing, right now, we're showing at least 12 bike stalls. I mean, I don't think there's any inhibition. There's room to make that more. We've tried to provide some shelter for them because they're under part of the canopy. There's an opportunity, as one of the other commissioners had mentioned, that they'd be biking off the alley. So we've created an opening in this part of the parking lot away from the loading where a biker could come in and come here. Along Chicago Avenue, clearly it's a busy street, so the entrance to the store is going to be a busy spot. So I think that's where one, is slowing down or walking the bike into this area. We're keeping there's not bike storage along the front. We'd like to get them off the street front and away from the pedestrian movement.
12 is a healthy number, though, for a store this size. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a time when 12 bike stalls are used at any one time.
Now, let me ask the staff, didn't we have a ratio that we've used elsewhere? Does somebody remember that?
We did.
Somewhere.
We've discussed a bike ratio as the proposed downtown zoning, but other than that, we haven't had a set standard.
I'm sorry. I just had one more question, and that is actually for the alderman. Is the alderman in support of the applications that are being presented here?
Yes, I am in support.
Thank you.
I've been working with the community and the neighbors and to resolve some of the issues that have been raised. I think there's still a few open issues that are left to work on. So we're hearing what your questions are tonight, and you've raised some good ones, too.
Thank you.
I have a couple more. First, if Trader Joe's does build this, my shopping trips will go from probably 100 and something down to that average because they're so far away. We have to really stock up. But I do support the issue of the parking space size, and it's something that I had actually put a note in. So I think that's 3 of us on the commission that have an issue with that. A question that I had for you earlier, and I didn't get to it, is the 1-foot setback on the side of the shell. So where the shell is currently, and I don't know if this is best addressed to the city, but the concern I have with that is, if the shell is ever sold, then doesn't that determine or doesn't that impact then what can and the use of that property? Because setbacks are I'm not an expert, but they're there to give some respect to the adjacent properties. And it seems to me by only having 1 foot there, that could be an issue in the future. And I don't know if that's an issue for the Shell station, but for the future of what else gets built there. It would be built right up, if it's built right up to the property line, or are they going to have that setback, but not the property next to it? So, Craig?
Dennis Marino, Manager of Planning and Zoning. Mr. Friedman, I think clearly in that case, any future reuse of that site where the gas station is would have to be compliant with the zoning ordinance for that district or seek a variation. But the fact that there would only be a 1-foot setback on the Trader Joe's side wouldn't necessarily at all impair the ability of the site to the south to be redeveloped.
Okay. Thank you.
Testimony and evidence from persons who are opposing the request. I hear myself, but no one else can. At this point, we'll hear testimony and evidence from persons who are opposing the proposal. And if there is someone who
proposing sounds so pejorative. Couldn't we say people who have issues or questions?
Issues, questions, and objections, if you prefer. So I have a short list of people, and I'll just go right down the list unless someone has a different preference. Looks to me like Sue Shell. Snell? Shell.
I have no protest. I was here to speak on behalf of the development.
I guess that should be next. Let me ask for people who are speaking on behalf of the development. Go ahead, Ms. Shell.
Thank you. I live on the corner of Hinman and Dempster, and on the southwest corner, to be specific. And I have to say that I know my freezer will definitely be applauding this because I've been having to stock up myself once a month, and a lot of us in Evanston we even started a carpool, being environmentally conscious. This is like the best thing to happen for Evanston, saving on driving. Most of us use our bikes or walk everywhere, but we can't do that for a Trader Joe's. And we always would say, gee, if only we had a Trader Joe's, we wouldn't even need a car. And so I just want to say that I think this is a city. Yes, it will provide more traffic, but I think that our city can manage that. Somehow they put their heads together and usually manage well traffic issues. And, it's an urban environment. And that's why I live where I do. I love that about it. And I love that I can get on the L and I can be downtown Chicago in 25 minutes. And there's nothing you can't get to in Evanston right now, except a Trader Joe's by, public transportation. So anyway, I think many, many of us, I'm speaking for a lot of my friends who are not here tonight, because they thought it was only for the local people. And no, you can come too. But anyway, they are hailing this as a wonderful addition to the scene here in Evanston. So I thank you and hope everybody will consider that we can get this done. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the proposal? Now we'll hear from other people. Mr. Jeff Smith.
Not speaking on this issue.
Mr. Pat Mulheron.
Thank you, Commissioners. I am Pat Mulhern. I live in the 1224 block of Hinman on the alley right adjacent to the new development. And I think I've been newly appointed in the last 25 minutes to represent our street. And I would say this is conditional support. We are not in opposition of it. I believe that you are to be commended for many of the questions you've asked. I'll try to keep my comments brief because I think you've asked many of the same questions that those of us that live on Hinman have been asking. And just a little brief aside, I've been in the food service distribution business for 26 years, so my whole professional career has excitingly been about 53 and 64-foot trucks and how they get in and out of places. So, I have a personal interest in that. I want to say that, I think our neighborhood's very excited about it. We've also been very supportive of Melissa Wynn and the efforts she and her team have put forth. So we would like to see the store get built. I believe I can say that in the neighborhood with conditional support and many of the things you've asked about tonight. I'll be brief and try not to be redundant, but I have probably 8 or 10 things that we've accumulated that I would like to get on the record if I can. I assume this is all on the record. But let me start by thanking a bunch of people in the room. I think Craig, Johanna, and Melissa on the city's behalf have done a tremendous job shepherding this project to where it's at, and there can't be anything more emotional than building a retail grocery store that has tremendous volume attached to it in our neighborhood. So there's been a lot of work done, and I think as these things get tense and down to the final minutes, there's a lot of emotion around it, and we certainly have it in our neighborhood, but the work that's been done is extraordinary on behalf of the city. It's a great thing for the city. For Scott and Kevin and Mike, I think, we had a chance to meet with them for an hour before we came in tonight, and I will say that they are listening. And that's very important to us in the neighborhood, is to know that we have a developer that cares about what they're doing. And I think, they're to be commended for that as well. So today, just as early as today, the alley access issue, which was a big piece, the fence going across the back of the property, was brought up the last few days. And I think due to Scott, Mike, and Kevin's work with Melissa and the team working hard on them, we've resolved that issue. And I will make the comment that we aren't sure if there's been an impact study on our alley, but our alley is already a particularly busy alley. It's one of the busiest alleys. We have a 3-car garage that backs up to that, and I can tell you every day it's an adventure getting out of our garage. And then when we get out of our garage, it's an adventure getting out of the alley. So, it's a very important concession or adjustment made, and I think that's fantastic. I think we heard a lot about landscaping. We would like to, understand the landscape plan a little bit better before this comes to wherever it ends up. And also some of the noise issues are important to us as well. So I think those are all things that Scott and his team are trying to address. We would love to have the benefit of a little bit more time with his team, or at least another face-to-face meeting with many of my good neighbors, with Scott, to understand what adjustments can be made in those particular areas. One correction on the drawing that you've all seen, I think that's in the packet. We have not gotten it. But as you look across the alley at the structures on Hinman, that's an old drawing, and there's 4 garages, not 3. So the garages are not represented properly on that drawing. And if the 4th one was on there, you would see they all are, right there where the trucks are going to be delivering within the fence at Trader Joe's. So there's 4 structures, not 3. I think this, Craig Sklenard told me yesterday, this is an older drawing. Doesn't include, I think Neil and Tracy Brady, who were here tonight, added a garage 5 years ago maybe, and I think that's the confusion. But I think that is just a point of clarification we'd like to get in the record. One other piece, and you all brought it up, but the traffic impact study is really important, and I'm getting to the Chicago Avenue issue. That is one crazy busy street. Those of you that live in the area know it's not just Friday night. Commissioner Steele brought up the Friday night, which is definitely a busy time. Getting in and out of Whole Foods today, getting in and out of Jewel, the city was really smart about putting a pedestrian path in there. Each of us neighbors walks across that pedestrian path to Jewel from our side, and I can tell you we have to harass vehicles to stop, even with the signage that's out there. It's a matter of time before something happens there that we're not going to be proud of in this city, so part of this traffic impact study's got to address Chicago Avenue. Otherwise, we'll be addressing it at the wrong point in time when something's happened to a child or an adult or a senior citizen or any of us who cross that street. It's chaos at best. Every time I pull out of those stores, I worry about hitting somebody or being hit, and I consider myself a pretty conscientious driver. So I think that's quite important. Also, the impact on Dempster, the impact on Hamilton to the north and south, and also the impact on Hinman. These may be issues that are not in your purview, and if they aren't, we'll take them offline with Alderman Nguyen, and she is aware and helping us with those. But I think that store getting built is going to create issues that really ought to be dealt with ahead of that store being built. So there's long-term issues here, and the one I want to make sure we get on, the delivery hours we're working on right now. The neighborhood, we feel like the delivery hour window of 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. is just too big. That's a Trader Joe's issue. It's contentious. We think a 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. window, which I believe is closer to what Whole Foods uses, is really more in line with what we need. The trucks idling and the refrigeration equipment, I think that was brought up early in the discussion. Even when the truck engine's off, I think Commissioner Ledesma mentioned it, you still have a Thermo King unit running on that truck, which is very loud. So I know Scott's working on, helping us with the fencing to get us some sound barrier in there, but that's a real live issue still. There's a dumpster usage and garbage removal and pest control question that the neighbors brought up tonight before this meeting, and it has to do with access from the alley to the dumpster area as designed. And, part of it, one of the things I wanted to say when I started, we don't want to make this difficult, we just want to make it right, is the way we're thinking about it in the neighborhood. So things are moving around still here at the last minute, and most of us saw drawings really for the first time on the 4th of July when we got the notice in the mail, and half our neighborhood was out of town, and so, it feels like we're in a panic here to get some of these things on record. The dumpster issue, I think, is one we would like to have resolved with Scott and his team and Trader Joe's prior to this moving forward. A couple other housekeeping things, rules about where the staff can and can't park. On Hinman, we already, as residents, have given up a lot of our parking ability to Union and Space, to a vibrant, district that's now developed at Chicago and Dempster and to Blind Faith, and that's a fantastic thing that we all like that vibrant area, but on Hinman, we've given up a lot of our ability to park. Many of the folks that are here tonight don't have garages either, so as we get more commercially viable, more traffic, it gets tougher and tougher to park there as well. Couple other issues here. Again, the traffic issue, I brought that up. We'd like to consider, Trader Joe's, or make sure that Trader Joe's, and we talked about this evening too, turns their signs off at 8 p.m. when the store closes, so that it's not lit overnight at 26 feet off the ground. We'd like as minimal light impact as we can. And then the last piece, I think the developers hit this in their comments, but the fence itself, we'd like them to consider different materials besides 8-foot cinder. Besides 8-foot wood, possibly cinder, if that's a better noise barrier. And I don't think any of us are experts on that, but we'd like to understand the noise impact and what's the best way to insulate it. So I think, I would say those are not terribly major issues versus what they were good enough to get done here in the last 24 hours around the fence itself. I think that was really a contentious issue in the neighborhood, and everybody came together, and I will say Trader Joe's and Craig and his team with Melissa Badger and them got it done, and that was very important to us. So if we can clean, some of these issues up, many of which you brought up tonight, I commend you. You have a tough job there, and you guys and gals clearly do your homework here, because many of the questions we had in the back of the room you answered or asked and had answered prior to us being able to speak. But respectfully, we appreciate all you do, and our neighborhood will be a great neighbor to Trader Joe's if and when it gets there, and we're hopeful that that happens in the right way. Thank you.
Lisa Koch.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cook, and I live at 1242 Hinman. And I am really concerned about a couple of issues for this development because I kind of lived through Union and Space coming in, and we were directly behind them. So I have a lot of concerns about the noise issue. At the time when Union and Space came in, I had young children, and to this day, every night at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, they crash all their bottles, and other of my neighbors can attest how loud that is. And it's really problematic, and there's just seems like there's never been any recourse. So I'm very concerned about the noise issue. I'm really concerned about the traffic in the alley as well. Having kids that come in and out of their bikes through our garage, and we're a little bit to the north, but it's still a serious issue. I'm concerned about the noise pollution. I'm concerned about the pollution of all these trucks that are going to pull up, directly behind our homes, and how that's going to impact us. My son has severe asthma, and, I'm sure that there is a connection with the environment, and making the air quality even worse is an issue for me as well. So those are some of my concerns. And I appreciate you taking the time to hear me. I hope you'll be able to address them.
Thank you. Kathy, maybe Slaw? Maybe Shaw?
I don't need to say anything because my husband.
Okay. Neil Brody. Brady, thank you.
Hi, I'm Neil Brady. I live at 1220 Hinman, and if the garage diagram was correct, that would have been one of the garages that Pat mentioned that's now there. But we live directly behind where the parking and the loading is going to occur. And Pat has represented us very well in sort of the thoughts of the neighborhood in the last 48, 72 hours as we've gotten more of the details of the specifics around the plan. And then, Doug here will speak, who was one of the commissioners until recently, and is also going to speak on our behalf. I'd just like to reiterate, just from a process point of view, or communicate to you that while we've been working with Melissa, and we do like the approach with the meeting we have with the developers today, but just from a process perspective, to let you know, for the people who are directly impacted by this, who live right there, it just does feel a little rushed if today were sort of the last opportunity to formally, be involved in a hearing to talk about some of these very, very important issues for us that will make us, perhaps not be able to leave our windows open for the rest of our life because there'll be so much noise or whatever coming out of it. We'd like to work in good faith with the developers and, by extension, indirectly with Trader Joe's and with Melissa, and hammer through these, potentially even hammer out a formal, good neighbor type agreement that we have with Trader Joe's to address all the very specific issues that Pat mentioned. And we think it merits it. It's a very big impact to us. We're excited about it directionally. The specifics matter a lot. And we're sort of just now really getting our hands around some of the really nitty-gritty details that a lot of you guys have brought up, so that, it's not like we've been studying this carefully and we've had all the access to information on some of this key stuff. And big things like the fence changing in the last 48 hours, I would give you a flavor of how much stuff is sort of in play and, kind of dynamic and really important to us from right now. So that's, with that, I'll hand it over to the next speakers. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I say something?
Yes.
Mr. Brady, if memory serves, I think this will come before the Planning and Development Committee. Am I right about that, Melissa? This will come before Planning and Development, so you will have another opportunity to make your case and to check up on some of the suggestions that have been made. This isn't the last forum for this issue to be aired. We're just one step in the process.
Tracy Qualtrotraki. Katraki?
And I, too, live in the absent garage, or behind the absent garage on the drawing. And I should have deferred because I'm going to say exactly what my husband said before me, which is we love to sit in our backyard in the summer days. We love to open our windows at night. And the idea of 3 semi-truck deliveries 7 days a week does really frighten us, even though we love Trader Joe's. We are welcoming of the proposal, and we're very grateful to Melissa Wynn for representing our interests, but we really would love it to work for us, and we'd love to be happy it's there. And the noise is a huge issue. So if we can work with the materials for the fence, for the delivery hours, those are really the main sticking points for us now. So thank you very much.
Doug Deutsch.
I'm Doug Doach. I live at 1216 Hinman. I was previously a member of the Plan Commission. I had the privilege of serving with Commissioner Updike for a number of years. I'm going to reiterate as a matter of substance what my neighbors have said, but also, as we were asked to do at the beginning of this process, tie this into the standards that the Plan Commission is bound by. I would start by saying that, I think most of my neighbors here tonight, I'm in favor of this project, but conditionally. I think until some issues are worked out, particularly as concern noise and congestion, it's not clear that the project meets the standards for plan development. In particular, Section 6-3-5-10, standards for special use, Section C requires a showing of a negative cumulative effect will not be made when the effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect on various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. Subsection D requires a finding that the project doesn't interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. And subsection F requires that the project does not cause undue traffic congestion. Again, I think if we can solve the issues that have been raised here by the Commission as well as by a number of my neighbors, I think it's well within the ability of the developer and Trader Joe's to show that these are met, but they're not met just yet. In particular, I would cite issues of congestion and noise. As to the fence, we do thank Terrico and Scott for that concession. That was very, very important and very useful for moving the process forward. The fence, I think, and we also appreciate the fact that they have agreed to an 8-foot fence. I think previously they had considered a shorter fence. But an 8-foot fence is important, and we would like the opportunity to explore with them a fence that maximizes the ability to shield noise between Trader Joe's and its lot on the one hand and the alley on the other hand. And that might mean a cinder block fence or a masonry fence of some type as opposed to the board fence that they're considering. We would ask also as part of that consideration that perhaps we think about some sort of planting, a trellis perhaps on the fence that would absorb odors and noise and contribute, we think, to the shielding that the fence is supposed to achieve. In addition, there is congestion in the alley that still needs to be addressed, in particular to do with garbage pickups. We're told that there's going to be daily garbage pickups, which is a good thing because presumably the Trader Joe's will generate a lot of trash and it will have to be picked up on a daily basis. We'd like to make sure that we have a clear and binding agreement built into the ordinance with respect to when those garbage pickups will be. That's something we'd also like to work out with them. It should not be at peak times in the morning and the afternoon when people are using the alley, because the garbage pickup, unlike the loading of the trucks, is in fact going to use the alley. If you look at the drawing, in the upper right-hand corner is where the garbage is going to be kept, where the dumpsters are going to be kept, and there is a door onto the alley. So garbage trucks will, in fact, be using the alley. And many of you, I'm sure, have had experience with large garbage trucks blocking the access and egress to alleys. So we'd like to have a chance to hammer out with them when exactly these daily pickups with the large garbage trucks will be. Presumably, it should be in a defined period of time in the middle of the day. In addition, we are very concerned, as a number of people have said, about the noise element from the deliveries. We've got these 3-time-a-day deliveries with large semis. I think one of my neighbors asked for a binding agreement on when those deliveries would be. We suggested an hour before the store opens and an hour after the store closes. I'm sure that Trader Joe's will think that that is too restrictive, but we'd like a clear agreement with the developer and Trader Joe's on that. We'd also like, as part of that understanding, an agreement that there will be no idling from the trucks that are there. It's similarly to the Whole Foods situation. What we hope will not happen is that the delivery trucks, the large semis, arrive a couple of hours early and sit and idle. But basically, they would be idling. They would not be idling. They'd have a window, a short time before and a time after, to make their deliveries in order to control the noise. We also understand that Terraco has offered to have the mechanicals on the roof shielded by a large parapet, approximately a 5-foot parapet, which seems like an excellent design choice. That parapet, though, I think is open to review after a period of time. One of the things that Terraco had suggested to us is that after a year, they would be open to reviewing whether or not that parapet had actually worked as intended to shield the neighborhood from noise. And so the one-year review period that they had suggested to us in the neighborhood meeting just before this, I would suggest should be built into the ordinance as well. I think that really sums up the set of specific issues that the neighbors have generally. I would emphasize for myself personally that I'm in favor of this project. I think it will be a great addition for all the reasons that people have submitted, on the condition that we are able to work out these arrangements. And I know that there are other steps in the process before this goes to the City Council, which is the final deciding body, but we would ask that prior to any additional steps being taken, that we be assured that the concerns that have been raised tonight have been resolved. If they are resolved, I would submit that the standards for a planned unit development that I had raised as question marks at the beginning of this would be met and the project should go forward. Thank you.
Scott Gendel.
Already spoken.
I thought that. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition or in favor of the proposal? Does the applicant have any rebuttal testimony or further testimony that might answer some of the questions that have been raised?
I just want to make mention of the fact that we all have busy lives, and we did have a May 31st community meeting on this. Some of the people here were in attendance, and again, you don't focus on these things until you actually get the notice in the mail that it's up on the Plan Commission. Some of these discussions, just candidly, I wish we had 30 days ago as opposed to getting closer to this meeting, but be it as it is. I think that there's a lot of good that has come out of this hearing tonight and a lot of good that's come out of the conversation with the residents. Typically, what we've found is that it's a three-pronged approach, and the three prongs are the governing body, staff, the residents, and the developer being a combination with the tenant. But you all work together, you listen to each other. I'm hearing some things from them that I know we have to address. There are things intuitively that I know that are concerns of the residents that a week after the store opens will dissipate. There'll be non-issues, but that unknown is difficult for people in the process. I think that the things that we have to work with the residents on, one is the noise issue and the sound attenuation, and I think there are solutions that won't be perfect solutions, but that will meet a lot of their concerns, and we're willing to go a great measure to meet and listen to those concerns. As it relates to traffic, people said that Chicago Avenue is a busy street, and it is. It is a busy street. We're not bringing a substantial amount of new traffic to that street. A lot of our customers are already there, or they're actually going to take cars off the street because people who would be using Chicago Avenue to go somewhere else can now take their bicycle or walk over and won't have to have their cars on Chicago Avenue anymore. And so I think those things have to be considered as well when we look at a project like this in terms of the balance that we bring and the balance that we bring to a community. I think when all is said and done, like all processes and compromises, everyone will be a little bit unhappy with the end result, but that usually makes for the right decision, and we're willing to work with the residents and this commission to make this development work. There are certain parameters that Trader Joe's has that are beyond our control, and we'll be frank with you when we hit one of those roadblocks with you, and then you'll have to make a decision, just like Trader Joe's does, as to whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze. Having said that, the people on Hinman have a vested stake in this development, and they certainly are being heard by us, and we're going to address those concerns to the best of our ability. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify at this time? Sir, could you state your name and address and indicate whether you've been sworn as a witness?
Dan Dorfman, 1232 Hinman, and no, I've not, because I didn't expect to speak, so.
You tell the truth in your testimony before this commission.
Yes. I just want to emphasize something I have not heard at all, and that is, or at least minimally, I think there should be landscaping along the alleyway, and I think that needs to be emphasized. And I think not just from the point of view of noise, but from the point of view of aesthetics, which might seem like a funny issue for an alley, but we live on that street. We know that inspectors come by and they require the barns to be painted in certain, in good repair, etc. Can I have stuff in the alleys that would be unsightly? And so I, from the point of view of sound and from the point of view of how the thing looks, I strongly urge that there be landscaping outside the fence along the alley. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderman Nguyen.
Mr. Cox tells me I'm permitted to speak. It was a little unclear. I think that you've heard a lot from the community about this this evening, and you've raised a number of questions as well that I find very interesting as a member of the City Council. And I'm not trying to suggest to you what you might do, but I think that if we had several weeks to continue working with the community members and with Terrico, we could get a number of these things resolved. I know that August is a tough time to have a meeting. I would not like it if you waited till your next August meeting, but perhaps had an intermediate meeting. I don't know whether that's something that the Plan Commission would consider. But I think if we had some time, that a number of these issues could be worked out. And I agree with Mr. Doach. It would be preferable, I believe, to have these things worked out, most of them, if at all possible, here at the Plan Commission, rather than having it come to P&D. But if it comes to P&D, we certainly are able to deal with that as well.
Thank you.
And may I also add that I will be out of town until July 26th.
And you'd like to come?
I would very much like to come. I'm leaving this Saturday, and I'll be out of town until July 26th.
Thank you.
Okay. If that shapes your calendar at all.
We are done with testimony at this time, and the question is, and it looks to me, I agree with Lenny, that there are some issues where we need additional testimony to meet the standards, particularly as it relates to noise, as it relates to diminished property values. I think there's probably enough for cumulative effect given the nature of Chicago Avenue, but there too we might need additional testimony. Let me ask the Commission if you want to proceed tonight to make decisions or continue this for a short date. for additional testimony by both, by anyone who wishes to testify in the matter. Mr. Friedman.
No, go ahead.
I just.
Anyone to my left? Go ahead.
I'm in favor of doing this on an expedited basis. I mean, I think that the general consensus here is that, we all want this to succeed. And as Mr. Deutsch's comments, and the Alderman's comments, I think that, if we all pull together, we could do this. So I'm for coming back on a shortened schedule. I was going to say something funny, but it wouldn't have worked out. But for an unpaid position, I'd be very happy to come back as many times. No, but I'm serious. I think it's a great project, but I'd like to get this done, and I'd like to work with the community and the alderman as well as the developer to get it done. So I'm in favor of it. Yeah.
Anyone else want to speak to this issue?
Yeah, I'm in favor of coming back as well, but I think we need to have some sort of framework as to how the differences are going to be worked out before we get here the next time. There are certain things, I think the sound attenuation is a big issue that I think the developer has also indicated that he's willing to work with the people from the community in coming up with a solution. I think the initial proposal is an 8-foot fence, and now the issue of aesthetic has also been brought up, and also possibly landscaping around there to block some of the sound. So that is one major issue. The other thing is delivery hours. We do have, there are, Whole Foods is not far from there, Jewels is not far from there, so maybe why not to explore when those guys are delivering. Because I think you're looking for 7 to 9 p.m. now, and I think from what somebody mentioned that Jewels, I think Whole Foods is actually...
I don't want to interrupt, but...
it's okay.
Trader Joe's is looking for 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Okay. So, and one of the things that we heard was that what you're asking for is different from what other grocers in that street are. So again, and you also mentioned that there are certain points that that may be cost prohibitive for Trader Joe to consider some of the things that the neighbors want. So it makes sense to, we need a channel by which the neighbors and then also the city are actually working, so when we get here, some of these issues are addressed. We know that there will be certain issues that no matter how you address it, people may not be satisfied with it. So we need those things in place, how you guys communicate this.
Lenny, did you have? Annette?
Okay, I think we should...
Mr. Chair, I will ask the city manager's office to work with, as a go-between between the neighbors and Terrico with the city staff so that there can be these meetings before the next meeting, so before your next meeting, so you're not coming before with open issues unless that they're unresolvable.
Last question for the developer. You are putting up a parapet wall to basically to conceal the mechanicals above the roof, right? Correct. So that stuff is permanent. So realistically, you cannot come back. In a year, if somebody comes to you and say, we still hear a lot of mechanical noise over here, it's going to be cost prohibitive for you to go and tear it out. So
no, I don't think that's what was intended, and we had this discussion beforehand. One, the advancements made in HVAC units right now compared to even 3 years ago are astounding in terms of noise reduction, efficiency, the issues that you have in some older buildings. And I want to add, though, that remember something, we're taking out of play 21,000 square feet of buildings and replacing them with 13,000 square feet of buildings. In fact, the Blockbuster Video building was designed with compressors for a grocery store, and then you had a restaurant and a tanning salon, which had really high-powered compressors there as well because of the heating and cooling requirements in those spaces as well. So we're actually lowering the volume level of that in terms of what was there and what will be there. As it related to the decibel level and the screening of the mechanicals, what we talked about in the meeting prior to this was that if after a year, we found that there was noise that interrupted someone's quality of life that we don't believe will be the case, that we would build an additional screening device on the east side of the HVAC unit compressor on the roof. So we would put additional screening there a year from there if the neighborhood said, well, one, it's not screening it, or two, there's too much noise. We're going to put that in our agreement with the neighborhood that we'll go back and put up that screening device, although our position is today that we don't need it, but if in fact it is a problem, we'll correct it. And we'll put that in our agreement as part of a condition of the special use.
Thanks for that explanation. Alderman Nguyen, I'm very glad you made that suggestion, because I too agree that it's an incomplete packet that we were given, and that there's significant issues that still need to be addressed. The other issue that I would like to see addressed is public parking. Significant city resources are being put into this parking lot, and I would like to see some spaces available for public before 9 o'clock. It seems to me that that neighborhood is very difficult to park in, and a lot of city funds are being put into that lot, or at least from a tax credit perspective, and I would like to see some spaces available before 9 o'clock. I think many of us go into that neighborhood, especially go to Union and Space, and parking is very difficult, and so I would like to see that. But I am in favor of delaying any vote tonight.
The shared parking question is really not before the commission, which deals with land use issues. But
that's correct.
The alderman wishes to speak to it.
Well, I agree with the chair on that. And Mr. Freeman, the Trader Joe's is leasing the parking lot from us, so it's not still acting entirely as a public parking lot for 24 hours a day. We've reached a very, very hard-fought agreement with them to get the spaces available as we deem, the city deems appropriate for the public after 9 o'clock. And at this point, that's as far as the discussion's going to go. We've reached what we can reach with them. And they are leasing the parking lot from us. So it's not a public parking lot. They have leased it.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone on my right have further comments? Let me ask if the 20...
Two little comments, two short comments.
Go ahead.
Just two comments or suggestions. When you say that the car parking spots can be available to the public after 9, and I assume it's before 6, before deliveries start?
No, those are 9 to 8. 9 to 8.
9 to 8 in the morning.
Oh, you can only use those parking spots between 9 and 9?
9 and 8 a.m.
Okay, so if some of the shared parking is in the corner where the semis are going to be backing up between 6 and 8 in the morning?
And not anymore.
Not anymore, okay, got it.
We're flipping the shared parking probably to this area right here. So you'll have the
okay.
You have the parking on the far north end of the site and the far west end of the site.
Got it. The second was sort of a suggestion, and I'm sure an architect can bat this down right away. To minimize the noise, maybe you can have sort of a canopy from that fence in the alley, so it should almost look like an extension of the building in that part, so that the trucks back up into an area that is covered. That would minimize noise from the alley.
There is a portion of the...
Yeah, I know. I saw that. This is why I thought, if you extend it, that would even minimize the noise while they're backing up into that area.
I have some thoughts into what we can do relative to sound attenuation and also bringing up that volume.
Let me ask, any other comments?
I have one. First of all, I'm in agreement also in meeting in a short period of time, whatever it takes to push it forward. But this is more of a general one, and I'm aiming at the aldermen in the city. Human nature being what it is, you're going to see people pull into Jewel or pull into Whole Foods, and they're going to leave their car there if they just need to walk over to Trader Joe's. I'm not so much concerned about the one from Whole Foods, but I am concerned about that cross, the ability to cross safely Chicago Avenue. And as pointed out, sometimes you really have to, well, the onus is on the pedestrian at this point, even though all the signs are up. And what I see is kind of an interesting, perhaps, phenomenon where you're going to see fewer cars coming in to the lot here, but you're going to see people leaving their cars over there, and you're going to see more pedestrian traffic trying to cross Chicago Avenue. And if there's any merit to that, I think it should be looked at this point. Okay. I'm through.
Alderman?
And that is an issue we recognized from the first moment that this Trader Joe's was being proposed. I live on the 1100 block of Hinman and have since 1988, so I'm very aware of the hazards of crossing Chicago Avenue. The city is analyzing all of the pedestrian movements and the traffic movements in and out of the various parking lots. Our city traffic engineer has decided there should be a single crossing, and that's to organize pedestrians so that they know where is the safest place to cross. I agree completely. We have to make it more visible and let people know that that is the location to cross, that they should not try and scamper across, which is just a death wish. So we really need to get people to recognize that there is a safe crossing, and it's at Hamilton. And if that needs to be marked better with a flashing light or something that's solar powered, we'll work on that. Because, I mean, obviously, that's the worst case scenario, and we don't want to go near it.
Any more comments? Is the 25th of July, which I think is a Wednesday.
The alderman is out until the 26th of July.
26th? So that would take us to August 1st. Is that a feasible date for commissioners?
It's not for me.
What date is that?
August 1st, a Wednesday.
Can do it.
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Can't do the first.
What about if we go out another week to the 8th?
That's our regular plan commission meeting.
Well, that would be easy.
Or if they want to do it short, why can't you not do it on a Wednesday? Why not try the 26th when she's back? Was that a nod from you, Craig?
I'm sorry, I was looking at my calendar.
The 26th is Thursday.
It's a Thursday, not a Wednesday.
I will not do that.
We want to do this short, right? We want to get this done before the next meeting. Is that correct? That's the goal, correct?
If
What about
people can come.
The 30th, the 31st?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, but I've just been told that the neighbors are gone that first week of August.
It's a really close neighborhood.
So
Is everyone here?
it sounds,
August 8th?
mostly. That's our next regularly scheduled meeting, and it sounds like that's when we'll have to go. Is there any other comments from the commission? Is there a motion to continue this to a date certain?
Motion to continue.
Please use your
Motion to continue plan development of 1211 Chicago Avenue to our next regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting of August 8th, 2012 at 7 p.m.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. I'd like to commend the neighbors, the developer, and the alderman. This is my neighborhood, too. I am probably across from this site 5 or 6 days a week. Thank you for all your work. The commission will take a 10-minute recess, and then proceed with other items on the agenda.
And I'd like to say, it is so good to have you here. You look great. So good. I cannot tell you.
Well, in my case, we're going to bicycle.
Yeah.
We bicycle there, but I can see where a rational actor who's going to have a problem getting into this one will go to either one. The easiest space to get married, as you pointed out, and they're going to leave their car. They're going to leave their car. And they'll do a little, yeah, I mean,
I would do it.
People who shop in the area, they have certain things they buy at Jewel. They have certain things they buy at Costco and Trader Joe's and over here.
Hold on, I gotta ask.
They're finding that they're going to be short on space. They're not going to be
Designate some of those spaces. Charging.
Yeah. But you know, I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know. Is it good? I think I've been there. We're almost you know, at the real peak. More parking. There's more parking than you can stick in. But I think what Trader Joe's is saying is really is true, is that people want to shop who are close to food. They can get the best values at each market. They're not great standards. Although I'm trying to think now, what else is it? Yeah, the one on Lake Milwaukee. Beautiful. Yeah, touch base chair. Yeah. It has been. Yeah. So.
The laws of supply and demand apparently don't apply to my son's working, he just graduated U of I.
I think Dominic said
give him a card. I mean, so he's looking to take the strength.
And then the other thing that was brought up was being that close to high school. They're somewhat tolerating the fact that that can be controlled.
Yeah, I can't make sure they're loaded up. That's all him.
I think the toughie here is Trader Joe's itself. They're very rigid, it sounds like, on what they, for parking and what they want to get exception for.
I'm
Either
wrapping
that
up
or
a couple of things through Friday morning, so I may not be very available tomorrow, but beginning of the week, I'll start looking at some stuff. But we've got to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
As far as this goes,
Yeah, next week.
No, we're, oh, God.
No.
I won't go. I'm going to...
The reference to the aquaponics farm in Baldwin, Wisconsin. That's the one that's 27,000 square feet.
The Plan Commission is back in session. The zoning text amendment, 12 PLND 0036, regarding the regulation of aquaponics, is the next item on the agenda. I believe there's someone from staff, maybe multiple people who want to speak to this.
Good evening, Melissa Klotz, zoning planner. The idea of aquaponics has been brought to the city by multiple users who are hoping to possibly bring this use into the city sometime within the next year, and possibly over time it could grow to be more than that. As a general overview, aquaponics is the symbiotic propagation of plants and fish in an indoor or outdoor recirculating environment that may result in the harvest of said plants and fish. Basically, it's a system where fish feed off of the plants and plants use the fish waste so that both thrive and you can harvest both the fish and the plants. It's not necessarily quite that simple, but that is the gist of it. You can do it indoors, outdoors, on a rooftop. You can have a small system in your own backyard or in a fish tank in your house. Lots of different ways to do it. So what city staff is proposing is that aquaponics be a special use in all B, C, I, and M zoning districts. Probably the biggest reason for the special use is to look at a case-by-case basis. For instance, an outdoor use could potentially have impacts on neighbors, and in certain areas it may be something that the city doesn't want, but in other areas it could definitely be something that thrives. I guess other than that, I will leave it up to you guys for some questions.
Me first? Yeah. Okay. First of all, I think, Melissa, you've done a terrific job researching this. I think one of the questions that was brought up last time was the concern about the food for the fish and whether that would be an odor type issue. And as it is, with some research that Melissa did, and I was a little involved in it, we found that the fish are fed pellets, dried pellets, no odor whatsoever. And the ponds themselves, if you were around them, you'd also find that they don't have any odor. One issue that I'd still like to bring up for consideration is my concern about having any plants or any fish that would be considered by the IDNR as invasive species. And I'd like to make sure that they are not included, even considered. Okay, I'm making a distinction between invasive and species that are from other. Okay.
We need to, let me interrupt you. I need to get the commissioner's comments and then open it up to the public. And I'll be asking you to identify yourself and so on and so forth.
Okay, what I was going to say, there is a difference between an invasive species and a non-native species. I'm not concerned about the non-native species if it's not invasive. Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the commissioners?
In that regard, I'm wondering if there's a commonly used way of designating whether something would it be easy to determine whether something is an invasive species or not?
No, Asian carp.
I don't think it would be that easy. I would almost rather leave it up to the DNR and just go with their regulations on it.
No.
But they have regulations.
Yes.
Yes, aquaponics is required to follow the same regulations as fish farms, so anything in place with that.
Okay, thank you.
And are we talking about processing the fish also here, or just raising the fish? Because I know we wanted to make that distinction.
The processing does not take place on site. That would require many more certifications at the state and federal levels. So generally, aquaponics establishments do not do that. More typically, they freeze the fish and ship them out that way, or for local distribution, people can come and pick them up live.
Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Are there any special regulations for the transport of either dead fish or live fish that need to be included?
I wouldn't think so from a zoning perspective. They would be required to follow all health department, FDA, those type of regulations, and I would think we would be comfortable at that level, being that they can't do the processing on site to begin with.
Well, they do some processing because they do freeze the fish or kill the fish. So the initial portion, not the processing of cutting up the fish, but the process of killing them can be done on site, correct?
That portion would have to be done on site, and I would think that would be addressed best through the special use process, where you're looking at where on the site that should be done.
I'm concerned with regulations around killing animals. So I believe that there are certain methods used to, I would say, humanely maybe kill fish. Do those type of regulations, do we have to have anything in place in Evanston for something like that?
I wouldn't recommend that we do. Perhaps when we have some more insight from an aquaponics specialist, we can get a little more into that.
It looks like we have somebody here.
Go ahead.
This is why I'm very comfortable with a special use here, because there's so many unknowns. So I think the special use process is the vehicle of choice here to determine whether or not it should be allowed or not on a case-by-case basis.
Other commissioners? Comments from the general public?
We have this gentleman who can answer a couple of our questions.
Sorry.
It seems like.
Do I have to be sworn in?
Please.
Aye.
Will you tell the truth to the commission tonight?
Absolutely. I do. My name is John Gareth Proctor. I design and build aquaponics systems and have been doing so for 20 years. I've run large-scale systems, 20,000 gallons, 50,000 gallons, down to, when I taught science, the 10-gallon fish tank. To answer your question, you sever the spine immediately with a sharp blade. It's the same as fishing, filleting, fishing with kids. It's the same thing. But yes, you should not have it at the same facility. You do have to follow USDA guidelines for health, meaning that it has to be in a stainless steel kitchen, all the same things you would go, and if you're going to go get a nice piece of fish at a restaurant in town, you have to do the same kind of process. Go ahead.
So then they're not killed on site?
Typically, no. Typically, no. I mean, you're going to have an aquaponics site. You have your tank, you have your plant base, but it's generally very separated because the design of aquaponics is to go soilless. And what this does is it actually helps retain over 90% of water as opposed to farming in open land. So it's actually, think about it right now in this hot summer, it actually is very efficient on water. It's the most efficient way to grow food possible. Now, you don't want any disease, you don't want flies, you don't want any of these things anywhere near what I would call a clean room. If you go into one of the rooms I design, you can literally hose down the walls, and yet there's nothing ever dirty that goes in there outside of dust in the air. So it's grown like a clean room, and you actually transport the fish in tanks to another location. And a lot of times you'll go to a commercial kitchen like Now What's Cooking or something like that in town, rent out their space, or have someone actually do that for you. Because it does require...
Kill the fish and then...
Well, absolutely. It's the only way you can eat them.
No, I understand, of course. But the process is done outside, so you're taking the fish out.
Oh, yes, away from the facility.
Some people eat those live little baby shrimps, so some people eat alive. But
I know people that grow fish in their house and kill them and eat them right now. In town, all over the place. I mean, this is the fastest growing business almost in the history of business in the United States. Last year, it grew at 337%. I have lined up investors already. They're willing to drop a facility in town right now. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. And to make sure that it's put in place properly. Because a lot of the ordinances and things that we have in place apply to aquaponics quite well. Yes, if you have a backyard pond and it's more than 3 feet deep, swimming pool rules. You got to have a fence around it. You got to make it safe. So most of the ordinances we already have in place as a city take care of most of those type of issues. You can't have an open tank container without having some metal bars or something to obstruct a little child from climbing up into it. As far as the sanitation factor goes, fish are cold-blooded animals. They have absolutely no known transmitted diseases in between human beings and fish at all. So it's actually far safer to grow produce this way than to grow it on open land where there is manure, there are other animals out there. So it's the cleanest way to grow. And by the system design, it is organic by its nature because the fish waste is being used up 100% by the plants. You're growing plants to actually feed the fish typically. You can use pellets as well with their diet, but the large commercial places actually grow their own plants specifically for the fish. And they're grown by using the fish waste. I could just ramble on forever, so I'd rather just answer your questions directly. Mr. Freeman?
An industrial size, there's one up in Milwaukee, so I probably should remember that. But
yeah, growing power, sure.
Yeah. So if an industrial-sized hydroponics facility went into Evanston, how big would that be?
Their size is their entire aquaponics facility is only 40 feet by like 100 feet long. They have a 3-acre lot and they do all kinds of different things at Growing Power's location. But you can do this in a very small place. I mean, the facility one I designed was on 1/3 of an acre. So a very small space.
How many fish does that What type of output comes out of a place?
Well, a typical output, if you're going to take, I could go off maybe, it depends. If you're doing vertical like the plant in Chicago, that's different because now you're talking about multiple levels on square footage. You're talking about taking old warehouse, like a meat packing plant like they did at theplant.org, if you want to take a look at their facility. Their facility, they say they can generate about $100,000 of revenue a year off their system. The system I'm generating would generate probably about 35 per location, if not a little bit more. That's the general revenue. You're talking staffing. You need 2 to 4 people full-time, maybe 3 people full-time, part-time, something along those lines. So it is local jobs as well. In Chicago, you probably know the mayor waved his wand and it is legalized for Chicago. I don't want to have to go 1 mile south, to build my facility. I want it in my hometown where I was born and raised. So that's the reason I'm here, because this is the future of food. If you look across the Midwest and you look across at what's going right now, you'll see more farmers go out of business this year than any other year in recorded history since 1871, when we actually started recording weather events. So this is the way that we'll actually have local sustainable food, which my understanding is within the top 10 of our 150-year goals that we're looking for. So I think it is very important that the city take a strong stand to support it, but also regulate it correctly. Because you do need to make sure that that processing is not on site, because that's going to attract flies, and that can cause disease.
Typically, what fish are you raising?
In my case, I like to use blue tilapia because they're the tastiest, and if they get outside of the tanks here, they die in any temperatures below 50 degrees. So they are a non-invasive species. But if you look at DNR's list, they've actually already listed for all different types of fish, and there are certain ones that are allowed for this already. So it's already licensed and regulated.
So would you then recommend that the ordinance contain some kind of verbiage that says that processing is not allowed on site?
I would say that the processing could be on site, but it'd have to be separated some way physically. This is more of like a building standard we're talking about, where if the facility's here, you need to have some kind of way of closing it off from where you're actually doing the processing of the fish, but it could be off-site as well.
Are there any regulations today in Illinois that specify that?
No. All they go by is basically our health standards saying this is your kitchen, this is how it's set up, this is how you get rid of your waste, this is how you clean down your stainless steel sinks every day. Just general health rules that are already there. But I do think special use would be a good way to go on this, because this could be very much a case-by-case scenario, because this is very hot on the internet. Places that I was looking at 5 years ago that had 235 users now have 3 million users that are actually watching these videos. That's within 5 years' time.
And what does it cost to put in a place that's 30?
My cost, depending upon the type of structure, because you can do this Will Allen style, which is Growing Power up in Milwaukee, is a low-cost, low-tech, but very successful system where he put in hoop houses, which are basically large dome, plastic sheeted structures, and the size he's running would only run about $15,000. That's materials. Then you have to actually do the build out cost and the tank cost and some other things. So probably only around $50,000 for the build out on something along those lines, you know, give or take 10 grand here or there, depending upon what you run into. Digging in the ground, you're pouring concrete, you're putting a tank in the center of the whole room. Oh, we've dug in our backyards, you know, we've run into things. So that's a low-grade side. You know, the upscale side is you could do a, you know, what's called a polycarbonate frame structure, which is a steel structure with high-tech insulated greenhouse glass. And now we're talking, you know, $1 million plus. So these are the larger facilities we're talking about. You know, part of my concern is that, you know, what's the funny things people are going to do in their own backyard and, you know, not have an attachment to the swimming pool rules, reminding people they can't dig a pond in their backyard that's dangerous to, you know, other local kids, or, you know, kids are going to be kids. They're going to get in backyards. They're going to wander places. You know, and as far as the smell goes, it's like your backyard that used too much manure when they were setting up their garden beds last year. You know, people who don't know what they're doing could potentially do something, but, you know, chances are they'd have to really ruin a system. If you've ever known someone who's had a fish tank and hasn't taken care of it correctly, they smell, you know. But if it's run through an aquaponics system, it's a biological symbiotic system, whereas the ammonia or the nitrates come up, that actually generates the fish smell. The plants will grow faster and take on that. And so it's a system that self-regulates. It's a S population curve like we learned in high school biology. So are there any other questions I can help field for you? So, yeah, I do think special use would be important, especially if people are trying to put, you know, 1,000-gallon tanks in their living room when it's not built to, you know, hold, you know, how many tons that ends up coming out to be, you know. So there could be some good general information given to the public about aquaponics in general, you know, if there's something that comes out, because there are a lot of people out there interested in doing these things locally. You know, I just put my website up maybe 6 months ago, and I get at least, you know, a couple phone calls a week from local residents that are interested in doing these things.
What's your site?
Endlessgreens.com. Endless greens. The concept is we grow year-round as opposed to, you know, farmers who are seasonal. So, you know, the benefit of it is local production of food throughout the entire year. And I think that should be a big goal for everyone who lives on this planet right now.
So you think special use is the way to go, and I think
it's special use.
I think staff also.
And it has to be determined because, you know, if it's a business or residence, obviously there's different factors involved, you know, tax base, et cetera. Size of your tanks are going to matter. You know, is someone trying to go right up to the property line with their ponds? Well, we already have ordinances to say you can't build anything 3 feet off your fence line. So there's a lot of stuff that's already in play that we can simply use. I don't see much more need for additional ordinances beyond, you know, allowing it, but allowing maybe certain tank size in certain locations. If it goes over a certain size, I would recommend that it needs to actually have some kind of business license, simply because, you know, the funny people that people do, you know, funny things people do, you know. They end up putting a 2,000-gallon tank in their basement. It's right next to their power source, you know. That could be very dangerous, you know. So, you know, like I said, it's generally speaking, it's, you know, fish tanks growing plants, you know, but outside of that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's been interesting things that pass the zoning's desk and also permit desk and otherwise. So.
Other questions from the commissioners? Is there anyone else in the public that wants to speak to this?
So if you guys have any other questions, you can simply email me at gareth@endlessgreens.com. I'll be glad to assist.
Don't go away. We may have some yet
I'm
tonight.
sure. Absolutely.
Sir, I think you've previously been sworn.
Mr. Chairman, may I opine that the reason Mr. Smith is here is because he wants to open up a fish farm on Central Street?
Wrong.
Wrong?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Jeff Smith, 2724 Harrison. I basically support aquaponics. I support localized food production. I'm mainly here to talk about the next item on the agenda, but as a member of an organization largely made of homeowners, I'm also looking for the homeowner interest in this. The draft ordinance defines aquaponics as the symbiotic placement of plants and food and fish such that may result in the harvest or sale of a said fish. I don't think the city of Evanston should be in the business of regulating hypotheticals. There's no end. Once you start going down that slope, it would be a much tighter ordinance if it said it was intended to result or designed to result in the harvest and sale of fish. I understand previous speaker's concerns about possible competition to his industry, but I don't think we need to be in the business of policing the person with a 1,000-gallon or 2,000-gallon tank, regardless of what it has in the basement, simply because it could be used for that. We're not the aquarium police. We're not the backyard landscaping police, and we shouldn't be. If somebody wants to open up a tomato farm in Evanston, I think that's great. I don't think that would be cause for us to go around and start saying that everybody who's harvesting tomatoes is engaged in agriculture. In fact, I think we should encourage food production at the very local level. And I don't want to see anybody. All I'm growing is basil, Stuart. I've got 3 little fishes in my backyard pond, and I don't intend to eat them. It doesn't. I'm not a carpophile. So that's all I got on that. I think if you change it to designed to, that it pretty much addresses my concerns.
One of the problems maybe a problem with the proposed ordinance has to do with the questions that have been raised in the standards. The questions that have been raised involve whether the maintenance, construction, and operation is harmful to the public health, maybe the health of the operators, the health and survival of native species. The standards for special use don't regulate that. They talk about traffic congestion and significant natural and environmental features and so on. So if these questions about public health and safety are something that the Commission is concerned about, then probably we need an additional standard incorporated in this ordinance, along with the special use standards. Yeah.
There's a lot of lines that are going to blur over the next 30 or so years simply because the way the economy is changing, the things that were alluded to about agriculture, and also people don't have one job for 50 years, retire, get a gold watch. People are making do with all sorts of little things. You might have people who are, selling tchotchkes that they make on, Craigslist, and then they've got 2 or 3 different part-time jobs. So I think this is more akin, maybe, to at least on the small scale level, to hens or bees, which Evanston has been down that road before. For a large scale facility, then maybe zoning's more appropriate, but it seems to me that maybe it ought to be coming out of the Environment Board or human rather than zoning. I don't know.
There are many ways to regulate things. If we do it with a special use, I think we need an additional standard relating to the questions that have been raised here. Or maybe everyone's satisfied that we don't need to address that as part of the special, or it wouldn't be us, it would be the zoning board as part of the special use approval. But the questions raised and the there's a disjunction between the questions raised and the standards.
Excuse me, Scott. When someone opens a business and they use the facility, the land, for business purposes, but if there's any question about health and safety, aren't there other city departments that deal with that? Certainly with restaurants, and I would think hair salons, perhaps
Yes.
massage therapists.
I don't think we have a set of aquaponics health and safety rules yet.
State does. I'm sorry to jump in.
I mean, maybe they're sufficient, but the questions that were addressed are simply not addressed by the special use standards.
I have spoken with the city's health department, and they did look into it, and they felt comfortable with deferring to the state regulations on it. They don't intend to enact any additional regulations.
So should the, I suppose we don't have to put that in an ordinance. I'm just raising it. If the commission is satisfied that the other stuff out there is enough.
How would the state become aware that someone is starting an aquaponics business? Is there a license, a state license that they must obtain?
What scale triggers the requirement for a state license?
Your business, that's it. It's the same, aquaculture is basically fish farming. And fish farming's been in the state of Illinois for a long time. And so a lot of the regulations for health of workers and things of that nature are already written in place for that. As far as the licenses goes, there aren't that many people who are licensed by the state of Illinois for aquaponics yet. There's probably, I think, about 8 licenses given out in the state right now for
Your
aquaponics.
business licenses.
That's correct.
There's no licensing of operators, is there?
There is. There is.
Is the Department of Professional Standards?
DNR actually goes out and checks on your facility. You cannot grow fish and sell fish without getting that actual license.
For the facility? Or for the person?
For the facility. The person, of course, has to have a business license, but the facility or company must be inspected by the state of Illinois to legally sell the fish. And by the way, a lot of these systems don't use fish that you eat, by the way. One of my systems that I use, it's about 2,000 gallons, and I use goldfish in it.
And it's just for the plants?
Just for the plants.
Interesting.
They have better heat tolerances in both directions, and within Cook County, we do have the livestock ruling, which makes it illegal to raise livestock, and that's why we had to go through the whole chicken ordinance. And underneath that livestock rule, fish are in it as well.
So are you saying that in Cook County it's illegal to do aquaponics and raise the fish for consumption?
To sell for consumption, that's different. If you were to go to the plant in the city and go to 312 Aquaponics, they would say you can suggest a donation to them for a certain amount of fish and they give it to you. But they cannot technically sell it on the open market until Rahm Emanuel basically legalized it for Chicago.
Okay. How does the board wish to proceed? We have a proposed ordinance.
So just real quick, then the point of this is not to sell the fish, it's to have an ordinance that will support an industry that creates, that grows vegetables.
Is there a proposal to adopt?
It's only about 7% of the business, by the way.
Is there a proposal? Is there a motion to recommend approval of the draft ordinance.
I have one other question. Do we, and that's regarding the processing of the fish. Do we want to include something, or do we put that as during the special use?
Well, there's
the
nothing.
issue of processing the fish being separate from the tanks, and
There's nothing in the standards that would relate to the processing.
that's correct.
If it's regulated by the state, is that sufficient?
I can't answer that.
Well, your health department runs by those state regulations. So if they were subject to a health inspection, like most food processors are, they have to check in that as well. It's the same as checking someone's kitchen or something else.
When we were looking at the licensing or putting into the standard, a definition for distillery, this micro distillery, I think the question came up as to who regulated and who was the strictest. And I think the testimony said that the state of Illinois was much more restrictive than we would have been had we had our own regulations in place. Does that ring a bell? I think the state of Illinois probably would
Certainly
be
with
sufficient.
respect to liquor, and the DNR is
The DNR is
not to be tangled with.
Right.
Well, that's also the impression that I got in speaking with different businesses.
Yeah.
Well, who wants to make the motion?
Is there a motion?
So I make a motion for an ordinance amending portions of the zoning ordinance to create the aquaponics use of 71-0-12.
I second.
Do you wish to incorporate the wording that Mr. Smith suggested?
I do wish to incorporate the wording that Mr. Smith suggested, and that was changing may to intend. Was it the word
Yes.
intend?
Yes. Intended.
Intended use.
And probably we would want plants and fish to be in the disjunctive. So it would say plants or fish, since many operations involve the harvesting of plants, but not the fish.
But there's still,
I mean, this,
but there's still have fish, regardless if they're being harvested.
right, but this definition would not include an operation that harvests the plants but not the fish.
Okay.
That's why I suggest you replace "and" with "or."
Okay.
And the seconder accepts those changes?
I'll second with those changes.
Is there discussion before we go to the standards? Hearing no discussion, the first standard is whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan as adopted and amended from time to time by the City Council.
I believe it is.
It does, the comprehensive plan does promote business development in the city of Evanston. Whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property, there's no subject property, so it doesn't apply. Whether the proposed amendment will have an adverse effect on the value of adjacent properties, there's no adjacent property, so it doesn't apply. Adequacy of public services also is for map amendment. So those are the standards. Any further discussion before we vote? All those in favor say of recommending this ordinance, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The recommendation is unanimous. That brings us to the zoning text amendment concerning regulations for residential building height and dormer size. the R1, R2, and R3 districts.
This is a set of proposed text amendments that basically close loopholes for what the zoning ordinance intends regarding single-family residential structures in the R1, R2, and R3 zoning districts. There are a number of text amendments that are proposed. Some are more restrictive, most are less restrictive. So I will quickly run through each of them and kind of give an explanation on why they are needed. The first one would be that we would like to change the way we measure building height. Currently, it is measured as mean building height, measured to the slope, the mean slope of the roof, and that is to 35 feet. We'd like to change that to peak height. Most every other community in the region goes to peak height, and they do keep it at 35 feet. Now it's 35 feet or 2.5 stories. The biggest change that this could have is keeping that 2.5 stories and prohibiting third stories from emerging, as they can now if you know the regulations enough to get around them. That leads into our half-story definition. What we would like to do is create a definition that includes a 3-foot knee wall. There is an image in the memo. It was discussed at zoning committee and it was a little bit unclear, but basically what that does in an attic style house, it raises the roof enough that you have livable space in that attic without creating a full third story. So you are getting the intended 2.5 story maximum that the zoning ordinance currently intends to have, but doesn't necessarily. Added to that, since we are trying to stick to the 2.5 story intention, we would like the half story to be applicable to gable and hip roofs, basically any kind of roof that comes up to a point with a typical slope. We would be prohibiting half stories on gambrel and mansard roofs because those are the more boxy roofs where it's not so much of a half story, but it comes across as that full third story. Other than that, we would like to adjust the dormer regulations and make it equal for all sides on a house. Currently, front dormers, or let me see. I believe currently on side dormers they're allowed at 50%, and we would like to adjust that to be the same as front dormers, which is no more than 30%. Again, the more dormers you have, the boxier that half story gets and becomes a full story, so we're just trying to keep with that half story intention. Other than that, one additional change that was not discussed at zoning committee that staff thought of afterwards, we would like to add a provision that accessory buildings, meaning garages and sheds, that type of thing, should also be measured to peak height. We don't want to have one item left as being measured to mean height. It'll be something that can trip us up, and you could end up with a very large accessory building. So what we're looking to do is adjust that accessory building height, which is currently allowed at 17.5 feet to the mean height, and we'd like to adjust that to a 20-foot peak height. So in reality, it should stay about the same. It's just the way we're enforcing it will be more consistent. That pretty much sums it up.
I don't understand how with a 35-foot peak you end up with livable space.
Or a 2.5 story structure?
Right.
35 feet could technically allow you to have probably 3.5 stories. if you start thinking about measuring each floor, if you give it 10 feet, and you could add in an exposed basement, 35 feet is a lot higher than you imagine.
But the exposed basement would be part of the peak. And peak is measured from
ground level.
ground, average ground level, I assume.
Right.
So if you have an exposed basement, that uses up some of the 35 feet.
A little bit potentially, but you would still have some 30-plus feet for your 2.5 stories. It really shouldn't ever be restricting a house down to less than 2.5 stories.
Would it be better to relate the requirement to the ceiling height in the building? I mean, it occurs to me, we have a lot of old structures with ceiling heights of 11, 12 feet. And a lot of old structures would become non-conforming. Even those which have the knee walls that conform and fairly steep roofs. Because if we were in some place where the ceiling heights are 8 feet, typically, then that wouldn't be a problem. But this is Evanston. Lots of buildings constructed prior to air conditioning where the high ceilings were the solution to the heat. Not a great solution, but...
I had suggested in a previous, and first of all, I think you did an outstanding job, really an outstanding job. And I think I told you that the last time. And you really, for a guy who doesn't understand this stuff really well, I really appreciate it. But I did make a suggestion that we grandfather existing homes. So, example, if a home that does not conform to this burns down, they should be able to replace it and not have to conform to this. So, and that's not in here, but I think that would then address what you're talking about. Is I agree, there are homes that have, my first floor's got these, I have a 1888 Victorian where, humongous first floor ceilings, and I have a huge full third floor that's not being used right now. And I mean, I've not measured it, but I wonder whether my home would conform. All right, it probably will. I don't know, Rich, but you know where I am. So, but I think if you put something that says, okay, existing structures are grandfathered, and if they burn down, they can be replaced, to the scale they were. I would hate to see my home, which it really does have 3 full floors, not be able to be rebuilt. So that's why I made the recommendation, and I thought it would be in here, and it's not in here.
Can I just say, I think there's language already in the zoning code that for nonconformity, if something exists prior to the change, it's automatically legal nonconforming.
But that's legal nonconforming, not to be. But if it burns down, it doesn't mean you can replace it.
Actually, I think in our
It's ultimately left up to a decision by the zoning administrator, and typical practice is we have people call all the time where they're trying to refinance and they need to know that they can rebuild their house if it burns down. They can request a rebuild letter, and we can specifically state that although it is legal non-conforming, you will be allowed to rebuild.
Did the provision on that drop out of the ordinance when it was rewritten? There used to be a provision specifically addressing that for residential structures. Is that gone?
It's in there for certain regulations, but the overall catch-all clause is that it's up to the zoning administrator.
So if a zoning administrator is against it at the time, then it doesn't happen. It's not allowed.
We can look at some specific language to address your concern, but certainly we have consistently in the last 2 years approved those kinds of requests, I think, without exception.
2 years is a very small slice of history.
Right. We'll work with some language.
That would be great.
And just to
add, Commissioner Freeman, if the zoning administrator were to not grant a certificate of zoning compliance in such a case, the homeowner would still have the opportunity to then take that decision to the zoning board of appeals for additional consideration if they felt that they were aggrieved by the decision.
Which also brings me to another point. There was an additional memo passed out at the beginning of the meeting that was based on a concern of the preservation coordinator, given that a lot of the houses in the historic districts or that are historic landmarks may become non-conforming due to this or more non-conforming. So we're looking at adding a clause to the text amendment that would basically, it would be listed in the zoning ordinance as referring the Preservation Commission's recommendations to the zoning board if a variance was needed. So if you have a house that appears to be 3 stories and you want to add a dormer to it and we wouldn't allow it, when you go for a variance, given a positive recommendation by the Preservation Commission, it would hold a lot more weight in getting that variance granted.
How difficult would it be to incorporate ceiling height into regulations of peak height? I think it's a pervasive issue in much of Evanston, not merely East Evanston. I think it's aesthetically, maybe not aesthetically. I think there are places where neighborhoods are all houses which are large, peak height higher than 35 feet. When they get replaced, the option to do something similar would be useful even if they haven't burned down, which is why I look for a policy that incorporates the ceiling heights rather than to avoid the loophole, but to be consistent with the kind of housing stock we have.
I don't know that ceiling heights is the way to address that, because ceiling height is dealing with the interior look, and we're trying to deal with the overall exterior
But what
bulk.
pushes up the height is the high ceilings. It isn't large joists that are 2.5 feet tall.
But you
Joists
also
are-
don't want to potentially limit a smaller house that just happens to have larger ceilings.
I'm not suggesting that we would be doing that. I'm suggesting that we allow people in places where I think it's appropriate, which is the neighborhoods where the peak height is higher. And typically, I think the reason it's higher is because of the ceiling heights, to have a higher peak. And if the ceiling heights are 8 feet and you have a peak height of 35 stories, then it's a 3-story building. But if the ceiling heights are 12 or 15 feet, then it's not a 3-story building. That's why I think it's relevant. And I think the interior ceiling heights reflect in the exterior total height. I don't think they're unrelated. Except certain science fiction programs where the interior is bigger than the exterior.
Love you, Scott. Just speaking from plans that I've seen over the last 3 years and reviewed, we do have a lot of historic homes, and I can tell you that the typical floor height, I mean, even a maximum floor height for a historical building that did incorporate the height for heat kind of components, you're not going to see anything over 12 feet. So 12 feet is 12 feet per floor plate. That's a really high floor plate for a residential building itself. So you're talking at a 2-story, 24 feet, and then on top of that you have another 9 feet for a roof structure itself, 11 feet for a roof structure. So there are a lot of historic homes out there that run in that gamut.
I don't know, my home was built in '94. It's a Sears working man home. It's about 1,600 square feet. It's not a big home. About a third of the attic is inhabitable.
I'm right behind you, too.
It's close to 40 feet. And when I'm visiting people in East Evanston or parts of West Evanston, there's a lot of tall ceilings. I don't think it's an anomaly. Maybe an anomaly of people coming in for certification, but
If I could, just to remind everyone, the problem we're trying to address is the three-story homes that we've seen constructed in different parts of the city recently. The most recent one being in Northwest Evanston, where it's totally out of context with the surrounding neighborhood. And Chairman Peters raises a good concern in terms of the areas where there are more older three-story homes, and the context is different, certainly in that regard. But we have a sense of urgency about moving forward with this regulation to council, and certainly what we can do is work with the preservation coordinator along the lines that Melissa suggested a few minutes ago, and also look at other solutions to address the concern you have without opening the back door to more new three-story houses.
I'm not suggesting...
Yeah, I know you're not.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that where we see tall 2.5-story buildings, it's because of the interior height, and that might be a way of quickly tweaking this so that you don't make lots of new non-conforming buildings. I mean, my house, it doesn't matter. It's non-conforming in 11 different ways, maybe more. But lots of places will be made non-conforming, and I don't think it's a good way to proceed. I don't think it's a good policy to say, oh, well, we'll just grandfather them in.
Yeah, I believe my house would be non-conforming. And I think a whole bunch in my neighborhood would be.
I mean, I think about the house tour of the area on Davis, east of downtown. I don't think any of them would conform.
West downtown, too. Ridge Historic District.
Haven't had that house tour.
But, sorry, Chairman. Melissa, this is all in an effort to curb new three-story buildings coming. It's not to basically go back to somebody like Commissioner Seth and say, well, your 3-floor home is not income. It's out of work, right?
Correct. And I would venture to guess that most of the properties that you guys are talking about that would be non-conforming under these regulations are probably already non-conforming with the current height regulations. So we wouldn't be creating a whole new set of
Does that seem
non-conforming
like an
structures.
argument to make more non-conforming buildings?
No, I'm saying I don't think we really would be. There would be a few, but I don't think it would be a large amount more.
Well, my perception of the houses in parts of Evanston is different than yours. I think we'd be making a lot of non-conforming buildings. I don't think it's a good policy solution. But I've had my piece. I'm not going to be more redundant than I've already been.
But primarily, we're addressing concerns with new housing, are we not?
Correct.
Why don't we just say that?
Melissa. Yeah, he said, why don't we say that?
I mean, I hear us saying we're in a hurry, so let's do this, and it's not a good way. Oh, I shouldn't be redundant.
We could. I don't know if we want to go that route and have different regulations for new construction than for existing.
I don't think you can get away with that legally.
I pose one question to you, Chairman. You were involved in the 1993 rezoning, or at least you attended the hearings, correct?
I attended the hearings and did some of the writing. And
right. So I just want to provide an example of when we go in with like the R3. What we've experienced in some areas is that when we do a zoning change, there is some legal nonconforming that does occur because we want to achieve new goals for text amendments or for the zoning code as time changes itself.
But this isn't an example of that situation. This, where we have new goals and we would like to change the character of areas to meet the new goals. This is a situation where we have some loopholes, and I think there are ways of closing the loopholes without making more legal nonconforming uses. So given that there's a possibility of closing loopholes, I think that's the way to proceed, not say, okay, we'll just grandfather them all in. I agree with you. Where there is, if we wanted some area of Evanston to be different, then we would change the policy. Maybe grandfather things in so they don't all sue us. And it isn't such a hardship. But that's not what we're talking about accomplishing here. What we're talking about accomplishing is to avoid three-story buildings that come through careful design to go in the loopholes. I think we can do that with some small adjustments. I'm not sure. I haven't sat down and tried to do it. I should have done it before the meeting, but I didn't get out my ordinance drafting brain and try to do this.
I think from a staff standpoint, that hesitation is that it's actually very difficult to do. The regulations that we came up with, it was a work of many plan reviewers, zoning staff.
That's obvious to me. I think
and it
it's
took
a very good
many,
piece of work. I just think there could be a little.
I'm just not exactly sure how to go about what you're
it's really
suggesting.
good. And you've made the issues clear, and I really like the dormer section. I'm not saying it's easy. My comments about not doing this ahead of time is about it not being easy. It's hard.
Excuse me. I'm wondering if we really would be creating a lot of nonconforming uses that aren't already. From what you said, Craig, it may be that, our perception sitting here and trying to determine how tall our homes aren't realistic. I mean, it may be that if someone went out and did some measurements of some of the homes that seem to be in excess of the 35 feet, we'd find that they aren't.
We could ask some roofers. They often will know. They need ladders.
Well, I'm not sure how you go about measuring the peak. How do you do that? Is it easy to do?
It depends on your trigonometry.
Well, when someone comes in and asks for a permit to put in a new dormer, someone's making those calculations. How do they make those?
At that point, everything is dimensioned on the plans, and we're going by the architectural plans. Measuring a house out in the field is actually much more difficult to come up with the height.
So it wouldn't be an easy thing
wouldn't
just
be
for one of
easy.
you to go out with a calibrator and say, well, there really aren't that many non-conforming. That's not an easy thing to do.
I'm sure it could be done somehow.
I was looking for
It's
some
not
sort
that
of
easy.
We could get the
compromise.
sophomores to do it as a trig exercise.
I thought there are people that just look and say, oh, there you go.
Just point your iPhone. I'm sure there is an app.
I guess I'd like to, at least have a chance to see what I could craft on this. Unless there's some special immediate rush on three-story buildings permit applications.
There is a concern, but I think if it's prudent to continue it until your next meeting, that would give people time to take a look at possible alternatives as you suggest. But there is a concern about new construction. We encourage new construction certainly, but we're a little concerned about we don't want a repeat of the Hastings situation that we've had recently.
I was pretty surprised by the pictures you sent of the 2.5-story buildings. That certainly looked like.
They're part of the document.
Okay.
None of them are from Evanston, though.
Okay, I don't recognize any of these
No,
properties.
none of them are in Evanston. But those all could be built in Evanston, is what you're saying?
Under the current regulations, they would count as 2.5 stories. Once we have the loopholes closed, they would not be allowed as 2.5 stories. Which doesn't mean to say they couldn't go through the variance process, and if they're in a proper area where they might fit in with that character, they could be approved that way.
One thought could be that you could return this to your zoning committee for next week and allow some time to look at that.
That makes sense.
That's a shorter timeline, at least.
These days, yes. Yeah, that makes sense. How does the board wish to proceed? I have been redundant after promising not to be.
Scott, if you're willing to look into that and want to make a presentation of your findings at the zone committee of the Plan Commission, I'm for it. And it is next week.
I am as well. But I still would like to have some verbiage in there about the whatever we discussed earlier.
We'll work on adding a grandfather clause.
Or point to one that exists in our zoning regulations.
We're moving informally, and so I see Mr. Smith has a statement or question.
I'd like to add a few comments.
Go ahead.
Like a lot of things in Evanston, this, I guess, has been moving along without the vast majority of the public taking notice. I can see it's an empty room here. But a few people saw this and alerted each other, and I don't know how many homeowners were consulted when you were drafting this, or if it was all the experts. We're the people who live in the homes and have invested our, life savings in them, built our dreams around them, and part of that is taking into account what you can or can't do with them, which any property owner, including commercial owners, do. When we're doing the Central Street plan, there was a lot of talk about to what extent we want to legislate style. I think there's some real problems with this draft ordinance, and I start, first of all, in favor of closing loopholes. I think it's a good thing to have people on a level playing field. And there's been a few houses built where people have obviously really gamed the system, and dormers is one way you do it. Working around the median height is another way you do it. I disagree that it's that hard to measure height. I mean, there's this thing called a plumb line that they invented a couple thousand years ago, and as long as we have ladders, I still go up on my house. So short of assessors and appraisers, I've probably looked at more houses, including gambrel roofs, because that's what I've got in North Evanston than just about anybody I know. For purposes of comparables, because I've been involved with the neighborhood organizations, because I'm a pedestrian and a biker, and because I'm always looking at what people are doing to improve or not. The problem is this ordinance, first of all, it opens up a couple of loopholes. It allows, and if you've got a gable or hip roof, going up with a knee wall, so you're taking away what's right now a limit, the 60% rule. The 60% limiting, and if you don't know what the 60% rule is, you have to have 60% of the space on the top half floor. That's what makes it a half floor, that only 60% can you walk around without bumping your head. It's where you've got 7.5 feet clearance. So by giving a 3-foot knee wall and getting rid of the 60%, you actually allow more massing on this top, quote, half story for certain types of roofs that you don't have now. To understand and at the same time, it caps Dutch colonials at 2 stories. And there's a lot of Dutch colonials in North Evanston. It just says you can't have a half story. It actually incentivizes for new construction block-type housing. And to understand this, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Here's my house. It's a 2-story, the assessor says, Dutch colonial. Okay? Now, as you see, the second floor is set back. I actually don't have as much square footage on the second floor as I do on the first floor. Really, it's closer to being a 1.5-story house under the way we define it. Under the proposed ordinance, I can't go up an extra half story. I'm capped because it's a gambrel-type roof. Now, the odd thing is, if it was a straight colonial, just going up vertical face, 2 stories, and then with an attic, I could add another half story. So I'd actually get rewarded for having more mass than I do now by being allowed to have even more mass. Whereas a Dutch colonial, which was favored by the Pennsylvania Dutch, etc., because it was expandable, it was economical to build, it's energy efficient, it sheds snow, there's a lot of good reasons for it architecturally, gets punished under this, as do, near as I can tell, Cape Cods. What became clear to me in looking at this is not only that the dormer rule is a little bizarre to begin with, and yet we're expanding. If you look at my house again, I've got a dormer that goes all the way across the front. So I didn't even know I was non-conforming till this. But that's because it's really not so much a dormer as the way that they're building the second story, which feeds into what you're saying, that people are using dormers. And if there had been a rule saying you could only go 1 story and people were using this to get up to 2, and I don't know that was ever the case in Evanston because these were built before.
Would this be a dormer under the...
I think it would be. It's under the definition, it would be a dormer that's more than 30% or whatever you've got is the limit. But really, I think of it as more the rest of the roof is cut back. It starts to become, is the glass half empty, half full? You know, it's a matter of perspective. Anyway, the point is, you know, like look at this. This was right in the ordinance. Okay, this illustration of a little Cape Cod, which actually looks just like the one that I grew up in before when I was 3 to 5. But this house is not 2 stories. It's 1 story with some dormers in the attic. Why should we not allow a dormer there that goes even across the whole way? We would allow them to go up vertical and fill out the whole second floor with a block. Why should there be a blanket rule against dormers? The dormer rule right now is not limited to the top half story. It's limited to all dormers, even if you're only a completely illegal 2 stories. So that doesn't make any sense. It seems to me that what we want to be addressing is the gaming of the system through using dormers to get an extra half story that actually works out to being a full story. So to some extent, and again, I'm in support of the goals of this, but it's doing the opposite of what's proposed by its incentivizing and rewarding straight vertical faces, and it's a little arbitrary and in what it does. As you know, I don't know exactly which buildings that have gone up are driving this. I can think of one that went up on Colfax where they took a Dutch colonial and gave it a large IHOP-type peaked roof and dormed it out, and each to their own. But I shudder every time I walk by it. But now they're building a hotel next to it, near as I can tell. So what goes around comes around. And then there's a Lincoln Park type house that's been built on Payne. It looks like a greystone was transplanted, It's on west of Ewing. It used to be yellow. I don't know if they've painted it. And I'm not judging them. I'm just saying I don't like it. But, and it certainly they gamed the system, and it did. But overall, it's mass that creates the sense of dwarfing another house, I think, rather than the style of roof, and that we don't want to be limiting, saying this type of roof, yes, this type of roof, no, that there should be some rule that applies, and that a rule based more on square footage, area, cubic volume in relation to peak makes more sense as to what is or is not. I mean, a Dutch colonial is already, the downside of its good things is that it has no attic. I mean, you can't stand up in the attic. So unless somebody does something grotesque like the house on Colfax, you're by and large not going to build up. You're going to tend to go back. Now, with respect to the accessory buildings and the garages, again, another concern I'm having here is that a shift from the mean to the peak, recognizing that it's been gamed, takes away a lot of building capacity, especially on the garages, which, if you can't go up, might be the only place you can go. Well, last two sentences. That if you're looking for extra storage, okay, near as I can tell, most of the garages in North Evanston don't actually have cars in them. And maybe that's true throughout Evanston, but,
They're called man sheds, right?
I don't know. It's where we all keep our stuff that we can't let go of, and we keep thinking that American Pickers is going to come through and save us, and it's not going to happen. Anyway, but people have been. There's limits on what you can do with coach houses. There's limits on how much you can go up, et cetera. I think the limits that are in place, some people have tested them. I've seen a couple garages recently, but I think it's more a question of enforcing what we have and not allowing the variances rather than, essentially, taking 3, 4, 5, I don't know how many feet off of what you can build, just across the board. Maybe it's not an issue right now because we're in a down economy, and if you're going to make a change, it's maybe the time to do it rather than, provoking the furor that came out during the, quote, were any of you on the commission during the Monster House controversy? Let's see. I start to date myself. Dennis, the old man of the sea. There was a big thing about it, but I think if you're taking away massive amounts of what people can do to their garages and their homes all at once, there's a real potential takings problem. And so I would go maybe not back to the drawing board completely on this, but run it by a few more remodelers, homeowner associations, see what people are really thinking of doing, see what people are really upset about that's gone up in their neighborhood that they wouldn't like to see go up next to them. But on the other hand, if the two houses on either side of you have already done it, and now you're going to be capped, especially if you've got a little Cape Cod or a Dutch colonial, which tend to be more modest houses. They were middle class by design. Then I'd be real wary of that and locking people in and saying, okay, those that game the system get to keep it, and those of you who are just coming into your own now, sorry. So that's my suggestions on that. That it's the ordinance as drafted is doing a little bit of the opposite of what it wants to do, and I'm largely in favor of what it wants to do, but I think it has some real unintended consequences.
Quick question. Melissa, when this was first discussed, I think about a month ago, I think part of the effort was to make sure that the third floor, if indeed there's going to be a third floor, is actually within the 60%, right? And that hasn't changed based on anything that I've read yet.
Correct. While we're getting rid of the 60% rule by adjusting these other regulations, the half-story will be restricted to roughly 60%, maybe a little more square footage. But what it's really looking to do is we are not prohibiting certain types of roofs. We are prohibiting the build-out of a half-story on certain types of roofs. So you can't add bulk to it.
Mr. Smith, the image that you showed of the one-story structure with a dormer on it, that will still be in compliance today because it's only 1.5 story legally.
But the ordinance as it's written doesn't apply, doesn't limit it to the second story. It says you can't have a dormer that's wider than, 30% of the front, regardless. So my house is apparently not in compliance.
The proposed regulation is actually referring to side dormers. We're not changing the front dormer regulation, so you currently, it would take a closer look at your property to determine whether that's a dormer or a second story. If it's concluded that it's a dormer, it would already be non-conforming, but just from what I could see from here, it looked like it might be considered a full second story anyway, and you would be fine. But that regulation isn't changing.
Right. Currently, the front door, they're not changing. Side dormer, and the discussion of the problem made me aware that there is an existing problem with the dormer length ban because it doesn't limit it to bulky top popping out half stories. It could apply to a totally legitimate second story.
Okay, so in the way it's written, basically it's geared towards more side dormer. Mr. Smith, all the image that he showed will still be 1.5, so that's still in compliance. But then when we also talked about it in the subcommittee, I think you alluded to it a while ago, that in communities where somebody may want to actually build a new structure, whether a comparable structure in terms of height, I think I had expressed the wish that we should be able to come to staff and actually appeal for a variance to build new construction that will actually, in terms of height and also in terms of style, mimic what is already there without being.
Absolutely. If you're looking to put up new construction in a neighborhood where there are many full 3-story homes right there, you would be a great candidate for the variance process.
Okay. And then cleared this up for me. A while ago, Chairman Peters also said, well, let's assume that if somebody has a 3-story house, which I think said has, they will now be non-conforming. But then is this an effort to go to old homes and say, well, you are out of whack? Or this is, to my understanding, when it came up, was geared towards checking people who are trying to game the system and actually making it 2.5 story into building 3 stories and making it look like a 2.5 stories, right?
Correct. And if you have a home that is already 3 stories, there is no problem with finishing out that 3rd story. It's that we don't want added bulk put onto it. So if you want to finish it out and put your drywall in and make it livable space, there is nothing in these regulations that would prohibit that.
What about putting a back dormer on or something?
That would be increasing the bulk, and depending...
So I'm not planning it, but my attic is very livable. It's a walk up. It's practically a ballroom up there, except it's not usable. Right? It's not heated. However, but if you were going to do that, somebody should put a bathroom up there, and you want to, on the back wall where the slope is, want to be able to put a dormer in to put a bathroom.
Huh.
It's increasing bulk, but I mean, it's just making it so that you can use the space there. I just think there's a lot of houses in my neighborhood like mine, so. not the ones to the right and left of me. Those I'm taller than, but
Sounds big.
it's not. It's 2,100 square feet. It's not a big house.
Well,
It's a tall house.
Seth, in this particular case, we're talking, your attic is your third floor, right?
It is a third floor walk-up.
Okay, so if we had to make an assumption, if we're to expand, then the dormer, that will basically be where the dormer goes. You're not sticking another one on the third floor.
No,
is it?
it's just, no. It's,
It would depend on, you're assuming that your house is non-conforming. If it really is, it would depend on what regulation it's non-conforming on. If it's non-conforming on peak height and you're looking at adding a dormer that's within the 30% dormer size, and that dormer is not above the allowed peak height, you would still be allowed to do it.
I think, like we said about a half hour ago, you had made the recommendation that you'd like to have a week to work on it.
Would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
I make a motion that we postpone a vote on this text amendment of R1, R3 building heights and dormer regulations. Put that off until we have a chance to revisit it next week at our... Refer it to the zoning committee of the Plan Commission, which is meeting next week at
7 o'clock.
7:18 at 7 o'clock.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Is there any other business that needs to come up? Committee reports?
Just a reminder, the Comprehensive Plan Subcommittee of the Plan Commission will meet 7:30 in the morning on Wednesday, July 18th, and then the Zoning Committee of the Plan Commission will meet at 7:30 p.m., right? Or 7 p.m.? 7 p.m. on Wednesday, July 18th.
What's the agenda for the Plan Commission meeting?
For the comprehensive plan?
The comprehensive plan. Committee of.
Yeah, I'm
The Plan
crafting
Commission.
all that tomorrow, but it's a continuation of the discussion of existing plans and how we want to proceed of putting those into an update to the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Let's stay the night. I have a second right here.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
You want to see how to do it?
Sure.
It's easy. You can use your son, okay? You get to a point where you can see your top peak. You know how tall your sun is? You know how far from here it is to your sun.